Hi. I'm going to give up on Facebook for a little bit. I keep getting shut down. So I figured might as well just come hang out over here. Let's see. Coffee.
One of the richest men. He owns a studio. Girls were flocking to him. He was eccentric, there's no question about it. He wasn't crazy. And it had been strange in that he had so damn much money. He probably made the greatest aviation picture ever made, Hell's Angels.
Planes and the aviation industry were his first love.
He loved machines more than he did people, really.
Hughes was a man who lived on his ability to get along because they would make exceptions for him.
He was wealthy and he was powerful and he had cash.
He'd say, well, just remember, there's no one that I can't buy or destroy.
He was, for all intents and purposes, an inmate because he was a prisoner of his own fears.
He wanted me to be in constant touch with him. And I'd always, I just spoke to the poor.
Where are my papers?
Howard Hughes' life began in Houston, Texas, Christmas Eve, 1905. The Texas oil industry was booming, and Hughes' father left his law practice to live the life of a wildcat. Although not an immediate success in the oil business, he made ends meet by taking on odd jobs. His luck changed, however, when he bought a wooden prototype for the rock eater, an oil drilling bit which could chew through thick slabs of rock, the source of frustration for many an oil man. On manufacturing and testing the bit, Hughes Sr. brought a partner on board and founded the Sharp Hughes Tool Company. While his father was away selling his new discovery, Hughes' overprotective mother stayed home and lavished unusual amounts of attention on her only child.
His mother was a very powerful influence on him. Partly, I think, as much as anybody, helped instill this sort of lifelong phobia or fear in him of germs.
At the age of 16, Howard was away at school when he learned that his mother had died during surgery. 2 years later, Howard's father died of a heart attack.
When that happened, Hughes began to exhibit all the traits that you would see throughout his life. That very strong-willed character, that tremendous streak of independence. Nobody's going to tell me what to do with my money or how to run my various enterprises. All of those things that really dominated him as an adult manifested themselves very quickly, much to the surprise and anger, by the way, of the other family members.
He was smart enough at age 19 to go before a judge in Houston, convince the judge that he was sophisticated enough to buy his uncle, who owned, who also had ownership in Hughes Tool. At which time he became the sole owner of Hughes Tool.
But he wanted control from day one, the time he was 19, 20 years old, which was the one word, if you were going to describe the man from day one to the end, was control. He wanted to control everything.
Firmly in control of Hughes Tool Company, young Howard married socialite Ella Rice, packed their bags, and headed for Hollywood, a place whose glamour had always fascinated him. His uncle, screenwriter Rupert Hughes, was there to introduce him to the moguls of the film industry. The newlyweds settled into a Spanish-style home on fashionable Muirfield Road. Hollywood society embraced him, but secretly referred to him as the sucker with the money. Hughes began to immerse himself in the business of movie making, spending months on film sets, absorbing all the technical knowledge he could. He'd spend entire evenings dismantling film projectors, obsessed with learning every nuance of the industry. In a pattern that would continue the rest of his life, Hughes stopped carrying a watch, no longer distinguishing between day and night. During what he called his awake hours, he'd work up to 40 hours without sleep, breaking only for an occasional can of beans or an avocado and bacon sandwich. Once familiar with the cluttered sets, swinging moods of actors and directors, and the general confusion of filmmaking, Hughes decided it was time to become a player. He chose as his first project a story called Swell Hogan, an ill-fated venture that cost him $60,000. Hughes' family and associates begged him to stop squandering his fortune and get out of the picture business. He ignored them and immediately put up money for Everybody's Acting. The critics loved it, and profits from the film all but made up for his previous loss. At the age of 21, Hughes was a producer with a confirmed hit. With the limelight on him, Hughes wanted to free himself from the pressures of day-to-day business. So he hired on Noah Dietrich as an advisor.
Dietrich came to work for him in the 1930s when, as dependent as Howard was on the tool company based in Houston, he felt he needed some liaison who would be able to look over the books and advise him as to how it was doing.
Noah took the business from that point, built it up to where at times it was earning between $50 and $55 million a year in those days.
Now Hughes had time for what really interested him, the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. He established a film office and signed talented director Louis Milestone to a 3-year contract. Their first effort, Two Arabian Nights, made stars of then unknown actors Louis Wolheim and William Boyd. More importantly, it earned Hughes his first Academy Award in 1927. Next, failing to find a director who shared his love for airplanes, Hughes decided to write, produce, and direct Hell's Angels, an epic picture about 2 British flyers competing for the hand of an English socialite. Back at home, Hughes' own socialite, his wife Ella, had had enough. She filed for divorce, claiming abandonment and cruelty. For the production of Hell's Angels, Hughes employed what seemed like most of Hollywood. He acquired an air fleet that rivaled that of some small countries, buying up World War I fighter planes and hiring every available pilot in Hollywood. He even became obsessed with cloud formations, often postponing expensive production schedules until the skies were just right. On top of these headaches came a host of other problems. Hughes, an expert pilot himself, went up one day in a small scout plane he had never flown before. To the horror of the pilots and stuntmen, the plane went into a tailspin and crashed. Hughes walked away unhurt, leaving crew members to joke that at least he hadn't injured his check-writing arm. Hughes' luck was better than some. 2 other pilots died during production. By the time Hughes put finishing touches on Hell's Angels, the public had begun a love affair with the new talkie picture. Hughes was crestfallen. He wanted Hell's Angels to be the greatest epic ever seen, but he realized that without a soundtrack, it would have little chance. Against the pleading of business directors, Hughes had a new script written, and began refilming the dialogue scenes. Leading lady Greta Nielsen lost the part because of her thick Norwegian accent. Arlene Carpenter, then a bit player in Laurel and Hardy comedies, replaced her and was soon transformed by Hughes into Jean Harlow, the platinum blonde bombshell.
Would you be shocked if I put on something more comfortable?
$4 million later, the film premiered in typical Hughes style at Grauman's Chinese Theater.
You are looking at Hollywood Boulevard, illuminated for miles in honor of the opening of Hell's Angels. For the first time in history, fine streets in Hollywood Boulevard have been made into one-way streets for 2 miles through the heart of Hollywood to facilitate the handling of the traffic, bringing the throngs to this elaborate opening.
Hell's Angels broke box office records everywhere, but privately, Hughes confided that taking a project of that size on by himself was one of his biggest mistakes. But that didn't stop him from trying to cash in on the success of Hell's Angels. He released 2 quickly produced aviation pictures, Cock of the Air and Sky Devils. Both were complete failures. Another effort, Age for Love, was equally as bad. So too was his relationship with its leading lady, Billy Dove.
Howard was very much in love with Billy Dove, who in silent pictures was the most beautiful woman on the screen. But they had a falling out, and I never forgot. Howard told me he loaded all the furniture there
Me too.
in Billy's house. Took it
Sounds like a really good idea.
That's the block straight
I'm
up right on Wilshire Boulevard.
going
So
with
far
some
the
treat.
whole damn thing. Bring up the van and furniture and all.
Sweet dreams.
He amazes. He wouldn't be able to do that today anyway, I guess. But at that time, he did what he wanted.
In theaters around the country, newsreels broadcast sordid tales of thugs like Pretty Boy Floyd and John Dillinger. Hughes, reacting to moviegoers' fascination with gangsters, chose Scarface as his next project, a story loosely based on the life of Al Capone. This time, he took a more hands-off approach, allowing Howard Hawks to direct. Hawks cast Paul Muni and George Raft in the starring roles. The film, with its scenes of graphic violence, lust, rape, and hints of incest, proved to be controversial. In fact, the self-censoring Hays Office blacklisted the film, insisting on a new title and a new ending. But much to the surprise of Hollywood, Hughes sued the Hays Office and won the right to show Scarface in its original form.
He had a reputation for fighting the censors. Was he a great champion of First Amendment rights? And the answer to that is no. But he saw fighting the censors as a wonderful way to drum up mercantile interest in his movies.
Hughes never lost interest in films, but for a while he stepped away from movie making and became more serious about his favorite hobby, flying. He and his Hollywood pals could regularly be seen buzzing the skies above Southern California.
Noah Dietrich used to say, you go flying around with Howard. He goes out there and he picks any airplane that's on the damn landing strip and takes off from it. You're going to wind up getting killed. But Howard never got killed, nor did we.
Hughes would disappear for days, piloting his Boeing pursuit plane between California and Palm Springs. In 1934, Hughes entered the Boeing in an air meet in Miami. He easily won the race, with an average speed of 185 miles per hour. Fueled by his success, aviation became a full-time obsession to Hughes. Working under the pseudonym Charles Howard, Hughes earned $250 a month as an assistant pilot for American Airlines. He took the job in order to learn the intricacies and mechanics of flight.
He loved to fly airplanes, loved everything about airplanes, loved the gauges in airplanes, loved to talk to pilots. The whole process, he was absorbed by it.
After only 2 months, Hughes quit American Airlines and, along with mechanic Glenn Odekirk, formed the Hughes Aircraft Company. Together, they set out to design and build the world's fastest racer, the H-1.
That particular plane was one that he was instrumental in helping to design. But the heart of the way he designed airplanes was he was a great brain cook. Cull ideas from a whole range of things, weigh them, decide which ones might work best and off other people. The H-1 was a perfect example of it. Outstanding, very swift, extremely modern-looking plane for its time.
On August 18, 1935, Hughes boarded the H-1 and set a land speed record of 352 miles per hour.
As ship is raised from runway and wings into the air, Wraps are coming off craft that has long been called the mystery plane. And then the mystery unfolds as its owner, backer, builder, and pilot, Howard Hughes, brings the plane in from its test flight for a landing at the dangerous speed of 75 miles an hour. It's only 1935, yet millionaire sportsman Howard Hughes has flown over 300 miles an hour.
Then he began to dream of bigger prizes of the transcontinental flights. The next year, he flew another plane from California to Newark, set a transcontinental record for the time. The year after that, he got another plane. He repeated the process, each time shaving off time.
Well, Howard flying from Burbank, California to New York in 7 hours and 28 minutes is certainly some speed. Now, I understand that you flew at an average speed of 332 miles an hour. Is that correct? I'll get that. Well, is this the same ship that you set the world speed record of 352 miles an hour in? Yes.
The public was fascinated with Howard Hughes, dashing aviator. In 1937, Hughes was given the Harmon Trophy for outstanding achievement in aviation. In a White House ceremony, President Roosevelt presented Hughes with the trophy, saying he hoped someday they could fly together. By 1938, Hughes was ready to begin what would become one of his greatest achievements, a flight around the world.
If I seem to be in too much of a hurry to wait and post your pictures, it's not because I'm high-hat or anything like that, but just because I've been terribly worried that I wouldn't get out of here before the weather changed. I had a good break in the weather yesterday, and I've lost that, and I suppose it'll be fair today, but I've been in an awful rush to get away from here, and I hope you'll forgive me. Oh, you bet.
Thousands watched as Hughes and a hand-picked flight crew took to the skies aboard their modified Lockheed 14, dubbed the New York World Fair. For good luck, Hughes dipped the wings over then-girlfriend Katharine Hepburn's home and set out on a flight that would assure his name a place in aviation history.
Every conceivable kind of electronic gadget imaginable they packed onto that plane. The difference between that plane in 1938 and Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis across the water just slightly more than 10 years before that is like night and day. I mean, the Lockheed that he flew around the world, it was a very sophisticated airplane for its time, showed that interest of his in technology, and it was a great contribution towards seeing the kinds of long distances that the planes could tackle.
Hughes' first landing was a record breaker in itself, from New York to Paris in 16 hours and 38 minutes.
I certainly hope that the fine friendship that now exists between America and France will continue and be an example to the other countries of the world.
With Hughes at the controls, a course was charted from Paris to Moscow and on to Siberia, as the world watched and waited for news of the brave crew. But not all the news was good. Leaving Siberia, Hughes barely averted disaster when he narrowly missed flying the Lockheed head-on into a Siberian mountain range that had been misidentified on his U.S. survey map. Arriving in New York, Hughes was celebrated as a hero, circling the globe in the astonishing time of 3 days, 19 hours, and 7 minutes.
I know your time. Congratulations. Welcome home. That's for the highest hill. So is it true that you lost your antenna last night?
For 3 days, the painfully shy Hughes endured ticker tape parades and receptions in New York, Chicago, Washington, and Houston. In 1940, Hughes decided to move his aviation experience into a more practical arena by purchasing a controlling share in Trans World Airlines. Hughes was instrumental in the growth of TWA and even conceived the original design for the Lockheed Constellation.
He called us up one day and said, I want to take a group to New York. It's an inaugural of the new plane that we've just done. It was named after my wife, Connie Moore. It was called the Constellation. So I said, "Will you put the group together at your house and then meet me at the Burbank Airport? And we're going to do it as a midnight flight." So I said, "Sure. Who do you want?" I said, "Get every star in the business." We had Paulette Goddard. We had Hunter Turner, Merrill Oberon, Cary Grant. Every star you could think of was in that thing. I never got it. When I called Paulette Goddard, she said, "Tell Howard I'll do the trip, but I want 2 round-trip tickets to Rome." And I called Howard and I said, "You want Goddard, you got to give her 2 tickets to Rome." She said, "Oh, that bitch, give it to her." So she had 2 tickets to Rome. At any rate, as we got off the plane in New York, and there was a blizzard with a blowing 60-mile-an-hour tailwind, so we flew there in a little over 5 hours, which was fantastic for a prop ship at that time.
While Howard was busy flying friends from coast to coast, the war was beginning to rage in Europe. The Defense Department called on Hughes Aircraft to supply aircraft components, artillery shells, and cannon barrels. Within the crowded Hughes aircraft hangar, work was also underway on an all-wood, long-range bomber, dubbed the D-2. By 1942, Allied ships were being decimated by German U-boats. To overcome this menace, President Roosevelt looked to Henry J. Kaiser, a businessman turned shipbuilder during the war.
And because he'd been so successful at that, the plan he proposed, as much as anybody, talked Hughes into it initially. Let's build these giant flying boats to ferry material across the seas. That's the way you get around the German U-boat menace. And Hughes always liked a challenge. So that sounds great.
In anticipation of the flying boat contract, Hughes began testing his amphibious Sikorsky S-43 in Nevada's Lake Mead. In the process, he was involved in a violent crash, his fourth. Hughes again escaped injury, but 2 co-pilots died in the accident. Hughes learned quickly how to move in political circles and instructed his press agent John Meyer to entertain a group of visiting military men. Among the group was President Roosevelt's son, Elliot, a man with influence in the acquisition of military aircraft. Meyer escorted the men on tours of Hollywood. He threw parties in their honor. In attendance were hopeful starlets, all too willing to lavish attention on the important visitors. These contacts, plus Hughes' powerful Washington lobbyists, resulted in securing an additional contract for 100 of Hughes' XF-11 reconnaissance aircraft, an offshoot of the earlier D-2 design. While Hughes was content with having received the contracts, the actual task of designing and manufacturing the aircraft left him mentally exhausted.
The flying boat is an astonishing achievement in some ways, but one of the most impractical things ever conceived. I mean, building a plane of that size was an enormous undertaking to begin with, but building one out of wood, where you had to measure every particular piece for its density, versus a piece of metal where you know what that density will be, absolutely nightmarish kind of thing to undertake. And it helped as much as anything to push Hughes into his first major mental breakthrough, which occurred in World War II, where he went off to the desert of Nevada for several months and just basically had to isolate himself from the calls, from the pressure, from the decisions that went into building that particular. It's also one of the reasons it was not finished before the war was over.
Although World War II had ended, Hughes continued production on the flying boat and personally financed the completion of his XF-11. Many of Hughes' Hollywood friends looked on as he piloted the prototype XF-11. As in the past, Hughes insisted on personally testing his aircraft. The flight ended in tragedy as the plane lost a propeller and careened toward a residential section of Beverly Hills.
He could have saved himself. All he had to do was parachute out. But something went wrong with the plane, and he kind of fought with the plane trying to find out what was wrong with it, and boom, all of a sudden it hit. We were going to visit Dennis O'Keefe, who lived on the street about 2 blocks away from the country club. And as we got to Dennis's house, he said, "Christ, Howard's plane just took the top of our roof off the house and landed up in the country club, crashed." And I couldn't believe it. I drove over there, but Howard had been taken away already. He was really banged up.
Hughes was rushed to a Beverly Hills emergency room. Doctors reported that he was in shock, had serious burns, broken bones, and his torso had been crushed so badly that his heart had shifted to one side of his chest cavity. He was given morphine and left to die.
It's not entirely clear exactly how it affected him physically from then on out, but it has always been assumed that some of his attachment to codeine, which turned out to be a lifelong addiction, stemmed from that time.
Miraculously, Hughes survived, and while in the hospital showed promising signs of recovery.
While he was in the hospital and he began to feel better, they didn't have automatic beds. And Howard designed the automatic bed in the hospital where you could raise the feet or the head or the middle of it. Whatever the hell you want to do, the controls were at the bed, and all the hospitals have those beds now, and Howard designed that bed.
1 year after the crash and fully recovered, Hughes took to the air in the rebuilt XF-11. The government was not impressed and announced it would launch an investigation into Hughes' work as a defense contractor.
Mr. Hughes, the papers say that you're going back to Washington. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm going there to testify before Senator Brewster's War Investigating Committee. As you know, the committee has caused quite a stir by its investigation of my two airplane projects, the XF-11 photographic plane and my large flying boat.
$40 million has been paid by the government to the Hughes Aviation Company, and nothing has been thus far received. What became of the $40 million is what we want to know.
So I ask you this question again, Senator Brewster. During my last trip to Washington, and while we were having lunch in your suite at the Mayflower Hotel, did you or did you not offer to call off this entire investigation if I would agree to merge TWA, Trans World Airline, with your friend Juan Tripp's Pan American Airways?
With battle lines drawn, the hearings began on July 28, 1947, in the caucus room of the Senate Office Building. Press agent John Meyer was the first to take the stand and was questioned as to Hughes' special treatment of many government officials, including the $5,000 spent on booze, food, and women for Elliott Roosevelt and his fellow officers.
Girls were very pleasant.
What has that got to do with aircraft production?
They just went along. Every company in the business did it. We're no different.
Well, but is it, you say because she was very charming, that's the reason that you charged up $132.
That's right.
For which would go into the production of airplanes. Right. And now, will you tell us why you gave her $20 and charged it up to the company to go home if she was very charming?
You taught me. Very good. Point one.
Howard Hughes was the last witness to appear and showed obvious contempt for his accusers.
Now, will you give me the questions in advance that you want to ask me while I am here? Or will you give them to any third neutral party? Is it not true that you are going to propound the questions for me as I testify and based upon what I testify as I go along? Are you willing to set aside the questions in advance which you'll ask me?
Mr. Hughes.
When John Meyer failed to appear on August 8th, the committee became enraged.
Allow Mr. Hughes, I'm asking you what your answer was. And we're not going to have this bickering back and forth. You are before this committee, and you're going to answer the question.
You asked me just now about a reply that I made. My answer is I don't remember. The man is.
Well, I'll ask you again. Will you bring Mr. Mars in at the 2 o'clock session?
No, I don't think I will.
Will you try to bring him in?
Oh, I don't think I'll try.
All right.
Throughout the hearings, Hughes stood his ground, but the final straw came when questioning turned to the flying boat project.
I put the sweat of my life into this thing. I have my reputation rolled up in it, and I have stated several times that if it's a failure, I'll probably leave this country and never come back, and I mean it.
Overall, the committee had made a disastrous misjudgment. They sought to prove that Hughes had profited from his wartime contracts, when in reality, he had poured millions of his own dollars into the projects. During a break in the hearings, Hughes had huge sections of the flying boat moved from Culver City to Long Beach Harbor at a cost of $50,000. Technical crews worked day and night to assemble the components, as newspapers speculated that Hughes might attempt to fly the craft before the hearings resumed. In a stroke of public relations genius, newsreel cameras rolled as Hughes led senators on an inspection of the flying boat.
I think the United States owes a great debt of gratitude to Mr. Howard Hughes for conceiving and for constructing this great plane. It's one of the most valuable contributions to aeronautical science, I believe, which has ever been made, and will be of inestimable value, not only to aviation, but I believe eventually to the country's security.
On November 2nd, 1947, thousands of spectators looked on as Hughes taxied the 60-ton craft into Long Beach Harbor.
The Air Giant starts to move, driven by her 8 3,000 horsepower motors. And now for Mr. Hughes' surprise. As the enormous craft approaches her 95-mile-an-hour takeoff speed, the pilot lifts her onto the step and holds her there as she races through the choppy sea. And with the final drive of her engines, 200 tons are airborne, 5 months ahead of time, 70 feet off the water. She stays for a mile. $23 million worth of airplane has answered a lot of committee questions. It can fly.
Hughes had triumphantly proved the merit of his prized flying boat, and in the process brought about a quick end to the Brewster hearings.
When Senator Brewster realized that he was fighting a battle against public opinion, a losing battle, he folded up and took a run-out powder. Yes, that was the tip-off. When Senator Brewster hit the road for the backwoods of Maine, that meant the hearing was over. Washington was too hot for him. He couldn't take it. After that, the other senators in this committee saw no reason why they should fight Brewster's losing battle for him if he was too cowardly to remain and face the music.
I saw what Hughes did to Brewster during the hearing, and he helped choose a candidate to run against Brewster, gave financial assistance, and he defeated Brewster. And the last time I saw Owen Brewster, he was in the halls of the Senate begging for a $10,000 a year job, which he could not get.
Back in Hollywood, Hughes cultivated his image of Hollywood playboy. But as one starlet noted, Howard could have been cross-eyed and it wouldn't have mattered with all that dough.
Along with the notion that he made a lot of money, that he had a Midas touch, that he was an aviation genius, that he was a financial whiz, that he was a great movie maker. He also liked to add to that list of superlatives the fact he was a great ladies' man.
Hollywood gossip columns regularly featured Howard Hughes, linking him to scores of glamorous starlets.
He's a bachelor, very much available, and he courted every girl in the whole damn town. At one time, I'm sure he's dated, which is a kind of a kind word for it, all the girls on the 20th Century Fox contract list. Yeah, Howard, he had them going, boy. Howard was never a wallflower, but he didn't mingle too much either. Yes, he was very shy around women, but he had more women than anyone. I think he had more women than Errol Flynn. And of course, he had no trouble having dates because everyone knew who he was and everyone liked him. He used to love to go out and he'd dance. He was a good dancer. It's good rhythm. That guy could jitterbug, Latin dance, anything. He was fantastic. I was at the Coconut Grove one night with Howard Hughes and Marilyn Monroe. I saw him and Marilyn out there jitterbugging like crazy. Marilyn and I were drinking Dom Perignon. Howard was drinking cold water. What he did do with a lot of the girls, including Ginger Rogers, he'd have a whole tray of jewelry, and I mean jewelry, beautiful necklaces and brooches and rings. And Mr. Ginger turned him down. She wouldn't have been part of it. because she was his girl for a while. And Catherine Grayson took her. She had that whole tray of jewelry, as I remember. In fact, he offered Elizabeth Taylor $1 million tax-free if she would marry him. But Elizabeth, who was very young at the time, I think she's still in her teens, she turned him down. Very unromantic proposal. Unfortunately, the one trait in Howard that I never liked, and I liked this man very much, but he always told every girl he ever went with that he was going to marry her. Why the hell he said that, I don't know.
He was going with Lana Turner. And Lana was madly in love with him. And she thought sure she was going to marry him. And she went and had all the towels and bed linens monogrammed HH. When Howard found out about it, he says, "Why don't you marry Huntington Hartford?" He was very much in love with Linda Darnell, and she was gorgeous. And she told me they don't call it Hughes Tool Company for nothing.
Howard Hughes again turned a hobby into an industry when he purchased RKO Studios in May of 1948.
If he wanted to spend $22 million to buy RKO, whether RKO was a success or not didn't make much difference, because the following year, Hughes Tool would spit out another 50 or 55 million.
That was the company that year in and year out churned out the profits and made it possible for him to invest in all of these other things.
Even though he bought the studio and put some good people in there running it, he never saw the studio.
There used to be a legend that Howard Hughes went in the studio one night at midnight and said, "Paint it." Howard told me that wasn't true. He said the closest he ever got to RKO studio, he drove down Gower Street and he turned on the aid and says, "That studio needs a paint job." The thing was painted the next day.
He used to office in a little one-room office at Golden Studio. He'd have a desk and 2 wooden chairs, but he was just exactly across the aisle from a projection room. And there he would sit every night and see the rushes that were done all day long of all the various pictures at RKO. And he would sit there and pick out the scenes that he wanted put in and scenes he wanted cut.
Although Howard Hughes was now a powerful studio owner, he certainly didn't play the part.
Howard, when he'd work maybe 48 to 60 hours at a time, then conk out. He'd sometimes sleep in his car. He had the cheapest car you could buy. When I used to ride around with him, he had a Chevy, a stick shift, no radio. I was driving with him once, and I said, "Howard, with all your money, why the hell don't you get a Rolls Royce?" And he says, "Who do I have to impress?"
And he never had a dime in his pocket, never had any money.
He'd always borrow money. He never had any money out. He never thought about money. It just came in, you know.
I guess that Hughes Tool Company must have just given him millions to play with.
In the mid-50s, Hughes' favorite playground was Las Vegas, Nevada. He was a regular fixture at floor shows and enjoyed the company of glamorous showgirls, but only after a signed contract of silence was procured.
He moved to Las Vegas long before he bought hotels there, because he'd work 48 hours at a time, and then he'd go out and walk around the town. No one recognized him. And he liked it. You know, Las Vegas is a great place to be anonymous.
It was in Las Vegas that Howard Hughes lived in one of the few houses that he actually purchased. He called it the Greenhouse.
He lived here in the 50s, the very early 50s. And of course, it was about that time that he started to turn into this tremendous recluse. And he never returned here after he left here in 1955, I believe he left. At the time that he left it, there is a large area that had monstrous, actually hotel size, air conditioners, humidifiers, because like I say, he did have this horrible fear of germs. So the house was just literally a time capsule. Clothes were still in the closets, linens, beds were still made, just like he was planning to come back. This room that we're in right now, and is now the dining room, was actually his living room, and it was very sparsely furnished, and I would say in a I call it early motel or desperate American. It was very utilitarian, nothing pretty about it. This room was his viewing room. He watched movies constantly. He slept mostly during the day. And you'll notice on the windows, the heavy, heavy screening. There were a massive amount of phones when we originally came in here, approximately 50. All of them, of course, had hearing aids on, boosters on them, because he was very hard of hearing.
Within this hideaway, the only link to his business empire was this small office area, complete with a memo recorder and Edison voice writer. In Hollywood, RKO Studios took a dramatic downslide, losing over $8 million within the first few years of Hughes' control. Hughes was also responsible for firing a large number of RKO employees whom he suspected were communists. One of the persons fired was studio head Dory Sherry.
I got a call from Howard one night, and Howard said, I've got to get rid of Dory Sherry. He's a communistic bastard, and I want him the hell out of the studio.
Hughes was such a staunch anti-communist, he appeared at the Hollywood American Legion post to make a rare speech denouncing communism. During his tenure at RKO, Hughes began the curious practice of luring hundreds of potential starlets to Hollywood with promises of fame and fortune.
That's another thing I didn't like about him. He'd see a picture of a beautiful girl who would want to Miss America or something. He'd bring her here, do a test with her in the studio, stash her in a bungalow, and she could stay there for 10 years, and the bungalow's been paid for.
Sometimes he'd have 20 of them on his list. You know, set them up in apartments and give them cars to drive.
But she might never ever go back to the studio again. But if they did have something, he'd give them a chance. But most of the girls were not very artistically inclined. I guess they were just beautiful girls.
They'd wait by the phone for Howard to call, and he might call once a month, you know.
After all, if he said that somebody, for instance, Terry Moore was let go at Columbia, and Howard said, let's bring Terry Moore in. So I signed her up at the studio. It's interesting that later on, Terry came to the executives of the estate and said that she had secretly married him on the yacht.
Terry was a strict Mormon and very religious. And when she was going with Hughes, she was one of 3 Hollywood virgins in town. Terry told me, she says, I will not go to bed with Howard Hughes unless I'm married to him. She told him that to his face. So Howard, you know, had to skip with his yacht, marry him. And then he threw the log overboard. No record of it. But I'm sure it happened because Howard would do anything to get Terry in bed.
On December 17, 1953, Hughes founded the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, although it is questioned whether this was for strictly humanitarian reasons.
He solved all of his problems by creating this tax-exempt charitable organization. And the really interesting part, of course, is that the taxpayers pick up the bill for it, because in its first or second and third years of existence, the Medical Institute, about 84% of its revenue it returns to Howard Hughes, and it spends about 1% of its revenue on actual medical research. And you go through the years, it gets something like $2 million from Hughes Aircraft Company. And in the same period of time, it pays something like $22 or $23 million to Howard Hughes as interest payments and lease payments. And so it was really the ultimate charity.
By 1955, Hughes commanded a remarkable empire. Of special note was Hughes Aircraft, a company which was doing groundbreaking research in electronics and pioneering high-tech electronic weaponry. At his office on 7000 Romaine Street, Hughes began systematically isolating himself from business contacts through a division called Operations. This strange organization was crafted by assistant Bill Gay. Gay, a devout Mormon, hired on fellow church members to serve as operators, drivers, and personal aides to Hughes.
He had one particular section of it, which was in effect like a control panel, almost like a dispatcher's desk. You think of it as a police department. Somebody manned it 24 hours a day, receiving calls from various parts of the empire.
And these were attorneys, as well as people with the Hughes Tool Company, vice presidents, presidents, and airline people, and on and on and on. So that would consume hours just to get everybody notified of what was going on.
This was a device by remote control and enabled him to keep various parts of his empire in check and to respond to their demands when he wanted without having to directly confront a particular need.
One decision that Hughes could not insulate himself from was the purchase of a new fleet of jets for TWA. The selection and financing of the jets again drove Hughes to the brink of mental collapse. In a surprising turn of events, Hughes fired Noah Dietrich, his closest advisor of 32 years. That same year, Hughes married longtime acquaintance Jean Peters.
There were all kinds of theories at the time that he was possibly going to be committed for some mental problems, which is one of the reasons supposedly Noah Dietrich fell out of favor. By being married, you could only get the cooperation of the wife to assist in that process.
I remember, never forget one night, she was walking out of the hotel, and I said, "Hello, Jean, how are you?" And she turned to me and she says, "Have you seen Howard lately?" I thought it was very strange, because she was married to him at the time.
From then on, you also see a gradual mental decline in terms of those problems in his personality: fear of germs, phobias about disease and illness, an increasing desire to isolate himself from other human beings.
I found him in the garden of the Beverly Hills Hotel, wandering around, all alone, dressed. And I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I just came here to look around." I said, "Come in and have a drink with me." He said, "No, I'm going to pass, Johnny. That's the last time I saw him."
Under the growing pressure of the TWA decision, Hughes again sought a retreat from his problems. He flew to the Bahamas and spent his time isolated in a darkened hotel suite. He planned on making huge real estate investments, and ex-CIA man Bob Mayhew was brought in to aid in these transactions. Mayhew had been freelancing for Hughes for some time, mainly spying on ex-girlfriends and recruiting naive starlets. Before leaving the Bahamas, Hughes telephoned Mayhew and asked him to play a much more important role in the empire.
He explained to me that he did not want to make any public appearances in the future, that he wanted me to become his alter ego. He wanted me to convince the world that when they spoke to me, they in reality were speaking to Howard Hughes.
After 6 months in exile from the pressures of TWA, Hughes returned to Los Angeles and took up residence in the Beverly Hills Hotel. He began engineering a strange world within his rented bungalow. Although his room was cluttered with debris, he declared it a germ-free zone, and his staff of personal aides followed very precise methods while attending to Hughes.
For example, if you're going to open a can of food, you have to cover your hands with tissue paper. When you take the can opener to open, the bowl that the food goes into must be cleaned vigorously before that happens. When you open a car door for him to get into, you must hold the tissues over the car door.
His Romaine Street staff prepared a thick procedures manual for those working closely with Hughes.
Step number 3, washing of can. He should first soak and remove the label, and then brush the cylindrical part of the can over and over until all particles of dust, pieces of paper, and in general, all sources of contamination have been removed.
He wanted the drapes closed so people couldn't look in from outside. And at that particular time, he had me instruct the people to dip rags in alcohol and wipe all the doorknobs, so there'd be no germs on all the doorknobs.
And they had to be sanitized, so to speak. In other words, windows had to be closed, they had to be scotch taped down and so on, et cetera, et cetera.
He wouldn't shake hands with people and didn't want people touching him.
I think we bought up all the cosmetic gloves in Beverly Hills. I don't see how they could make any more movies till they ordered some more cosmetic gloves. You're supposed to keep them all the time. Little white gloves.
It is equally important to me that nobody ever opens any door or opening to any room, cabinet, or closet, or anything used to store any of my things, even for 1,000th of an inch, for 1,000th of a second. I don't want the possibility of dust or insects or anything of that nature entering.
Open the door as little as you can and get in before the bugs know. Everything gets in and then close it again quickly. That's all.
Hughes rarely bathed and went naked with increasing frequency. He spent a great deal of his time cleaning anything within reach with his endless supply of Kleenex. He stopped screening films at the studio and instead had them delivered to the bungalow. His drug use had increased, and a constant stream of messengers hand-delivered bottles of codeine to the Hughes staff. When lonely, he would often call for an aide to sit silently in the bungalow.
Well, he was sitting at this table over on there, and there's 2 other chairs in the room, and he, for some reason, just said, "Chuck, that's your chair." So every time I went in there, I would sit in that same goddamn chair. And we didn't talk to him. He talked to you. He said, "Chuck, what time is it?" So we were there different hours back and forth. So I would get up to go over and show him my watch. And I'd start to say, "It's 3:30, Mr. Hughes." Shh, don't say a thing. You didn't tell him what it was. You put your watch in front of him. Let him decide what time it was.
Howard Hughes built his own prison, and he made sure that he couldn't escape from it. He did it himself. He just had these aides surround him, and if you needed to talk to Hughes, you didn't talk to him.
And what's sad is that most of those around him at the time were completely catering to this phobia. There wasn't one person around who said, "Howard, this is crazy. This is silly. These things aren't going to bother you." I mean, they treated this seriously, like this was a matter of national security.
When his fear of germs subsided, Hughes was able to lapse into periods of clear thought. During one such period, he was able to negotiate financing for the fleet of TWA jets.
The way he worked out the financing was not acceptable in some ways to the TWA president and the executives of TWA.
Suit was filed against Hughes for mismanagement.
It wasn't too long after that when Hughes, for various reasons, sold all of his TWA stock at a figure which was about 86 per share, almost higher than it had ever been.
Well, the check was for $546,549,771.00,
which I believe was probably the largest business check ever written in the United States.
That was a fair piece of change. Yeah, it's a fair piece of change.
Hughes was advised to leave California in order to escape the sizable tax that would be assessed for the newly found windfall. In an action uncharacteristic of the once famous aviator, Hughes traveled by train, first to Boston and then on to Las Vegas. Under the direction of Bob Mayhew, Hughes was taken by stretcher into a service entrance of the Desert Inn, whereupon he and his aides settled into suites on the penthouse floor. Hughes would remain there in almost constant isolation for the next 4 years. He soon overstayed his welcome as Desert Inn owners sought to regain control of their profitable high roller suites.
Came a time later where they had given an instruction to the security guards that if Hughes was not vacated in 48 hours, that they would bodily come up to the 9th floor and kick him out of the hotel.
They were very unhappy when Hughes didn't want to leave, so it ended up that we started negotiations and finally made the deal in March to acquire the hotel.
Now, in other words, he bought the hotel because he needed a place to sleep.
During negotiations for the Desert Inn, Hughes' tax attorneys informed him that casino receipts qualified as active income. This effectively solved his tax dilemma.
He was in ecstasy. He called me and he said, "Imagine, this is money from heaven. Are there any more of these joints available?"
And so after that, we started to buy more hotels. He got excited about it and had all this cash laying around, so to speak.
About that time, he made up his mind that he wanted to be the biggest in the gaming business.
Hughes embarked on a spending spree that resulted in the ownership of the Desert Inn, Sands, Castaways, Frontier, Silver Slipper, and Landmark Casinos.
Las Vegas at that time had that image of being the center of organized crime, and organized crime was very deeply involved in it.
And Mr. Hughes came in and purchased those casinos that the state felt they were having trouble with, and he was very welcome in that regard.
He shifted the emphasis, the public emphasis from Las Vegas, the organized crime people, to Las Vegas, the billionaire industrialists.
The state of Nevada made exceptions for its most famous citizen.
Historically, everyone who asks for a Nevada gambling license has to personally appear before the Gaming Control Board or Gaming Commission.
And in each case, he refused to make an appearance. He refused to furnish fingerprints, contemporary photos, or financials.
And that was one of my responsibilities, as well, incidentally, to convince the state gaming licensing authorities not to require his personal appearance. So they adopted what they call the Hughes rule.
Hughes was not content with being the biggest in the gaming industry. He also sought to influence government citywide and statewide.
Mr. Hughes wanted to have a summary of every bill introduced in the Nevada legislature, and he wanted me to pass on his comments to the legislator, which I did. He had an insatiable appetite to want his views to be known and be accepted as far as certain legislation was concerned. He's a very bright human being. Most of the things he requested me to do, and Mr. Mayhew to do, not all of them, but most of them were good recommendations. Some of them we couldn't carry out.
One of the more difficult requests to come out of the penthouse was to try to halt construction of the International Hotel. Hughes felt that owner Kirk Kerkorian was stealing his limelight.
It was almost funny. I mean, when he gave me the assignment to try to dissuade Kerkorian from building the big International, I could not succeed because Kirk had made up his mind that that's what he was going to do.
And we said, okay, we'll go ahead, but we really couldn't do it. And we really didn't try because it was an embarrassing situation to try and stop another hotel from being built.
He had me talk to Kirk on a series, on many, many instances, trying to discourage him because of the underground testing that although high-rise hotels would collapse, and Kirk just went about his business. And although he was always very friendly to Mr. Hughes, but he didn't pay a damn bit of attention to what we had to say.
Howard Hughes' irrational thought process affected the profitability of his own hotels.
The Tournament of Champions was at the Desert Inn. It was a regular annual golf tournament that brought in the best pros and a lot of stars and a lot of tourists. And Hughes canceled the Tournament of Champions.
And to think that you would take this kind of an asset and just say, we'll turn it over gratis to someone else if they'll take us off the hook was incomprehensible to me. Yes, it bothered me. And of course, the fact that his reason was that it would create too many germs bothered me even more.
Hughes seemed to desire control of the whole state of Nevada as he sat in the darkened penthouse charting a map of his newest acquisitions, which included huge tracts of undeveloped land, the North Las Vegas airport, numerous mining claims, and a television station which was bought not only for investment purposes.
He wanted to watch the movies that he wanted to watch on television. He's watching a lot of television. And so I think maybe that was the motivation for buying that station.
Howard Hughes would watch the movies all night long, and as a general rule, he would have an aide call the next day complaining about the movie that ran last night. And this was almost an everyday occurrence. It would happen a lot.
He was the one that decided what movies were going to be shown, what was available, and get this movie from California. And so it ended up that whatever movie was scheduled, if he didn't want to run that, he'd say, I want to see this.
As Hughes kept occupied by watching films broadcast by his newly acquired TV station, Bob Mayhew took on an increasingly powerful and influential role in the Hughes empire. Although he had never met Hughes, he now held the title of head of Hughes Nevada operations.
And consequently, we began using the Romaine Street office in Hollywood less and less.
He very strongly told me upon his arrival in Las Vegas that not only did he want a complete severance from the group at 7,000 Romaine, which was Bill Gay and his associates, but he didn't want any of them to even come to Las Vegas.
And there was a power play going on between Bill Gay, Chester Davis, and Bob Mayhew. they were getting shunted farther aside, and Mayhew was coming up in the ranks.
Bill Gay, Frank William Gay, real name, but everybody called him Bill. Bill formulated his power, if that's the correct word, power. He formulated his authority in that he controlled the aides who surrounded Howard Hughes.
The aides really became his family. They supplied his food, they gave him the drugs he took every day, whether it was the Valium or codeine or whatever. They were his whole life support system.
Nobody had direct access to Hughes. The aides had direct access to Hughes, and Bill Gay had direct access to the aides. So if you wanted to talk to Hughes, you had to talk to Bill. Bill, in turn, had to talk to the aides.
Hughes paid no attention to the double dealing taking place within his empire and continued to focus his attention on television. It was while watching TV that Hughes learned of a new round of atomic testing planned for Nevada. He became paralyzed with fear. He knew that unlike the germs that he fought to shield himself from, radiation could not be prevented from entering his carefully guarded environment. He declared war on the Atomic Energy Commission and pledged unlimited resources in stopping the tests.
That's one of the reasons he established that power in the body. You know, trying to pull a lot of political strings to get that atomic testing stopped.
I recall a particular test called, it was codenamed Boxcar. And it was a large underground nuclear test. I think they were figuring it was about equal to about 1 million tons of TNT, megaton. And Hughes absolutely wanted that thing stopped.
He bent every effort humanly possible to stop the test in Nevada at the test site, but we were unsuccessful in that regard. And we had to stop pushing too hard because it was becoming embarrassing.
I remember numerous briefings with the Department of Energy prior to the Boxcar detonation. And I know that the reason that occurred was on the other side of the street. The Hughes people are saying, you can't do this, you've got to stop this.
These were genuine concerns, and he wrote memo after memo on these subjects in trying to get the test stopped.
I say Nevada is no longer so desperate for mere existence that it has to accept and swallow with a smile poisonous, contaminated radioactive waste material more horrible than human excrement. Unable to prevent the boxcar test, Hughes stepped up the battle and decided to garner support from whichever candidate would replace outgoing President Lyndon Johnson.
To put all this in true perspective, what happened is that Hughes made a decision on the same day, wrote me a memo telling me that he wanted me to see Richard Nixon as soon as possible and offer him unlimited help with his campaign because it was very important that he, Richard Nixon, be the next president of the United States. The same day, he sent me another memo saying to go see Hubert Humphrey and offer him unlimited support because it was very important that he be the next president of the United States.
In order to cover all bases, Hughes attempted a last-ditch effort to appeal to President Johnson.
Well, on 2 occasions, he wanted me to offer $1 million to then presidents to try to stop the underground testing. And by that time, I had reached a point in my world with him where I knew that I had to give him the impression that I was doing it for fear that he'd give the assignment to someone who'd be stupid enough to try.
By 1970, Hughes' health was clearly failing. As evident by logs maintained by the aides, he was taking an increasing amount of narcotics, including Emprin, an injectable form of codeine. He was also ingesting massive amounts of Valium, referred to as blue bombers by Hughes. As a result of the drug use, he was often constipated and required frequent enemas. He insisted that his urine be preserved in jars and stored in the closet of the penthouse. He was sleeping more and eating less. His kidneys were shrinking as a result of his 20-year addiction to codeine. Hughes was too far gone for wife Jean Peters, who had not seen her husband in over 3.5 years. She filed for divorce. Another battle had begun between Bob Mayhew and Hughes' personal aides, who were tightening their grip on Hughes.
I began to get the impression that some of my memos were not getting through to him.
That's probably where Mayhew may have misjudged, is that they still controlled the flow of information. And that was the ultimate test. They determined, what information got to Hughes and whether Mayhew's information got to Hughes. That was very critical, absolutely.
Communication shut down. Nobody could communicate. I had a very important thing that had to communicate through Mayhew, through Bob Mayhew, and Mayhew had no communication with me to shut us down. And you obviously sensed something wrong in that situation.
I think Mayhew was an empire builder, and I think he enjoyed the power and the position that he had in representing Hughes' interests. But I think he allocated to himself certain powers and privileges that were a little excessive.
I think jealousy, envy, and the fact that it looked like Mayhew was building his own empire within the Hughes empire that caused the demise of Bob Mayhew.
There's no doubt in my mind that they convinced him that I, in fact, had stolen money from him. And it breaks my heart to think that Howard Hughes died without knowing the difference.
On November 13th, 1970, a proxy came over the telecopier in the Desert Inn penthouse. It finalized an action that had been in the planning stages for months. Upon receiving Hughes' signature, the proxy effectively placed executive Bill Gay and Chester Davis, a Hughes TWA attorney, in control of the Hughes Nevada holdings. On November 25th, 1970, the Desert Inn penthouse was empty.
They took this man out of here Thanksgiving Eve. It was a very cold night. When his doctor had told me 2 days earlier that he was so sick that he would not move him from the Desert Inn to Sunrise Hospital, which is not a mile away, unless it were a dire emergency.
Well, he clearly was not in good physical shape when he left the Desert Inn. I mean, you are looking at now at someone who, who is consuming large quantities of Valium, codeine, other drugs.
Curiously, it was later revealed that despite his critical illness, the amounts of codeine and Valium made available to and apparently used by Hughes during the weeks shortly before the proxy was obtained soared to among the highest levels of his life.
They took this man on this night, waltzed him down 9 flights of exterior fire escape, and brought him to Nellis Airport and flew him to the Bahamas.
The contact that law enforcement and that media and that the public had, as far as Hughes, was Bob Mayhew. And Bob Mayhew sincerely believed that Hughes was forced to leave here against his will.
But there was some confusion as to who was the leader, who was in power, who should the political people listen to.
I began getting calls from the casino managers saying that people were moving into the cages. I called the governor. I said, has this been cleared with you? No. I called the Gaming Control Board. Has this been cleared with you? No. Called the Gaming Commission? No.
Mayhew was saying, I'm in charge. Holiday, Davis, and Gay were saying, no, we're in charge. And it was like a war. It was going on. One camp was headquartered at the Sands. Another camp was headquartered at the Frontier.
That confusion lasted for several months until it finally, the papers were sent in, powers of attorney were sent in to the government officials, placing Chester Davis and others in charge. So that was sufficient for them to feel comfortable that Mayhew was out and the new people were in.
I was sick. But then I realized the battle was over. And I realized that somehow, whatever they had done, they had convinced him that I was on the wrong side of the fence.
In the beginning of December, Hughes settled into a penthouse at the Britannia Beach Hotel on Paradise Island, far removed from the troubles prompted by his leaving Las Vegas. Little did Hughes know that a man whom he had never met would cause a far greater problem. That man was Clifford Irving. Irving was an author with 8 books to his credit, the most popular being Fake, a story about art forgeries. In 1971, Irving himself was crafting a far more substantial hoax. Irving announced that he was collaborating with Hughes on an autobiography and produced forged letters purportedly written by Hughes, proving that he was a willing participant. The McGraw-Hill Publishing Company felt satisfied with the documents and advanced Irving $100,000 for publishing rights. Although the Hughes Tool Company denied the authenticity of the book, there was no way to bring Hughes out of isolation to prove it. Irving seemingly crafted the perfect scam, for no one had so much as seen Hughes for over a decade, and many questioned his very existence.
Then it got to be of concern to I don't know whether it was probably government officials as well as the public. Does Howard Hughes exist? Is he alive?
There was a very serious thought in the public and among many people who were in areas of authority that thought he was probably dead. And these people were merely speaking for him. In an attempt to placate nervous Nevada gaming officials, Hughes placed a call to former Governor Paul Laxalt. Hughes' mental condition at the time seemed questionable, given this memo that was passed to him before the call was placed. Your conversation should be exactly as the script was outlined to you. Make it most emphatic, with no discussion as to why, just a confirmation. However, it would be a good idea to mention your loss of confidence in Mayhew, and you could end by emphasizing your intention to return to Las Vegas after your business trip. One of them said to me, they said, wait a minute, he talked on the phone to your predecessor, and, he was satisfied. Well, I said, I'm not my predecessor. I like my predecessor, Paul Laxalt, but I can't tell on the phone whether this is Howard Hughes or not. In order to end the confusion caused by the Irving hoax, it was decided that Hughes would speak by a telephone to a group of reporters who had known him before he became reclusive.
Hughes called me up from the Britannia Beach Hotel in the Bahamas the day before, and he says, I'm going to come out and expose Clifford Irving, the big hoax. And he said, I'm going to have a press conference which I'll talk on the phone. He said, I want you on it. We assembled in this room, and all the other reporters, asked all kinds of trick questions, make sure it was Howard Hughes and not Rich Little. And of course, when it came my turn, I said, I know that voice anywhere. I've heard it too many times. Etched in my memory.
When asked about Clifford Irving, Hughes simply responded, I don't know him. Reporters, however, took the liberty of asking far more personal questions.
Someone asked him about the report. He had fingernails 10 inches long. And, he laughed about it. He says, how the hell could I write my name?
And all the correspondents chuckle at it as well. Like these stories are exaggerated. But the stories weren't exaggerated. He was just that loony at the time. But what is intriguing about it is that he knew the outside world would frown on him if they knew he was that way.
And I, at that time, made a remark that as far as I was concerned, there's nothing but a big circus. They said, oh yeah, that's his voice. Well, what's the big deal? Why don't we just see this voice? If everything is fine? And so we had some doubts on whether or not he was really in control of his company. For the next 7 months, Hughes and his aides circled the globe in exile of corporate lawsuits and the ever-present horde of photographers attempting to snap a picture of the elusive billionaire. In each location, Hughes returned to his familiar world of a darkened hotel suite. He was constantly drugged and spent most of his waking hours viewing films projected on a screen at the foot of his bed. Hughes was oblivious to the ongoing TWA lawsuit and was in no condition to fight as executives pressured him to sell his namesake, the Hughes Tool Division.
TWA ultimately sued Hughes and was awarded a substantial judgment. And Hughes Tool Company, which had provided all the money through the years to fund all of Howard's various enterprises, from the filmmaking to the airplanes to everything, Howard gets enormous pressure to sell it. And this is at a time when he's really totally isolated, under the control of the people who are around him every day.
But I'm sure he had long-standing feelings of closeness, and he probably had some regret in having to let it go.
He lost roughly 1/3 of $1 billion as a result of that sale. It was probably one of the worst business decisions ever made. In the 5 years after he sold the company, it made more than he received for it, which was something like $150 million. And this is one of the times you see the really tragic side of Hughes's life, because he's convinced he has to sell it. He sells it. The judgment, of course, is later overturned. He really didn't have to.
One person who gained from the sale was Bill Gay, who now became executive vice president.
The title of president was reserved to Howard Hughes. Everything Bill said was supposedly based on word from on high. It wasn't until after Hughes's death that we began to wonder if anybody ever did, if Hughes ever did make those pronouncements.
The new executive committee decided to consolidate the remaining Hughes Nevada holdings into an umbrella corporation.
The new company that is created for the remainder of his holdings is called Summa Corporation. And when he first sees the name, he doesn't even understand what it is.
If you stop and consider, all of the companies that Hughes owned prior to Summa were all Hughes. There was Hughes Aircraft, Hughes Helicopters, Hughes this, Hughes Oil Company, Hughes Tool Company, Hughes, whatever it was, had Hughes in the name. Summa suddenly became the first company that didn't have a Hughes name on it, Summa.
It's one of those really sad points when you realize here is the business that provided the basis for everything that he did is gone, and the surviving business, he doesn't even know what the name means.
In March of 1973, Hughes moved again, this time to the Inn on the Park Hotel in London. He briefly broke out of his self-imposed isolation and agreed to a face-to-face meeting with Governor O'Callaghan.
We went up late at night. It's after midnight to meet with him. And they brought him in. He walked in, and we shook hands, and we sat down, and I asked the questions that had to be asked to make sure that we had the right person. Here's a man who was alive. It was his money, and he wanted to do this with his money, and that's fine.
He had to find someplace where a now deteriorating individual whose health was deteriorating could, in fact, live easily. His last protocol was Mexico.
Hughes was told that he had been moved to Acapulco because drugs were no longer available in Freeport. In actuality, the drugs were supplied by a New York pharmaceutical house.
He is no longer probably mentally in control, of his complete faculties. It would certainly appear that way when you're looking at the memos he's writing, and you're looking at all the drugs he's consuming.
I'm not so sure the new people who came on board thought about protecting him at all. They may have thought only about themselves and how they could enhance their own lives.
You also saw this by virtue of the fact that the people back in those days trying to get him to, well, where's your will? And get the will all in shape. There was a lot of concern.
Hughes never gave anything of the company away. He never gave anything of the company away. So everybody was trying to get a secure position.
Those aides, some of those aides at that time were making $75,000 a year for delivering messages, taking telephone calls. It seemed like a lot of money today, but if you go back in time, in that year, median family income, the average family in the U.S. was earning $12,000. So if you were looking at that today, you would be paying these people to do these errand jobs almost $250,000.
I can go down that whole list. If I were in the headhunting business, I don't know where I'd start to find any one of them a $10,000 job.
The last days of Howard Hughes lie in sharp contrast to a man who once controlled his life with such vigor. Hughes lay so weakened, he could no longer muster the strength to inject himself with codeine.
There was a story on the wire about a doctor in Mexico that had examined Hughes, and he was the first indication that I read, this is prior to many books that were published, that Hughes was definitely in very poor physical condition when he got to him.
He's got bed sores all over him. He's got a gaping sore on his head, bruises. And although the doctor doesn't see this, he's got broken hypodermic needles in his arm.
And it wasn't the kind of physical condition that had just developed during a week or so of illness. It was the kind of physical condition that apparently developed over many years of either a lifestyle or neglect.
The doctor's just looking at him physically and saying, why isn't this man in the hospital? And that's really a sad picture of a person who has deteriorated to that point, and no one really seems to care.
And it's not the Howard Hughes that I knew. He was helpless, really helpless.
Probably the most striking thing is this picture of a man who basically is all alone.
Well, there are the aides around him, and people who have been around him for a long period of time. There isn't what you would call anybody really close to him.
I hate to think so, but I think he probably was very sad at the end. He had no more TWA, no more Spruce Cruise, no more studio. He just had a lot of money.
On April 5th, 1976, Hughes slipped into a coma. His body lay still, except for tremors in the muscles of his face. Hughes' personal physician was called to the penthouse, but instead of immediately attending to the comatose Hughes, he spent nearly 2 hours rummaging through the files kept in the suite.
He began shredding documents that were in the hotel. And you have a feeling that there was a lot of this going on throughout the Hughes organization in those last days. A lot of documents were being destroyed. And the question always is, what were they and why?
4 hours after the doctor arrived, Hughes was loaded into an air ambulance chartered for Houston, where arrangements had been made for a hospital admission.
Had a beard, long, scraggly type hair, gray hair, and just a very shriveled up type of appearance, like he'd lost a lot of weight.
He looked almost dead when he boarded the airplane. You know, his eyes were wide open, and there was really very little life at all, if any, left in him. He was alive, though, because I did notice his mouth moved just a little bit once or twice.
As we were taxiing into the customs ramp, the doctor in the back said, "Just take your time. There's no need to hurry any longer." That's how we knew at that time. He died apparently as we were descending into Houston, just as we were coming in, approaching the airport.
The preliminary autopsy findings demonstrated that Mr. Hughes died of chronic renal disease.
One of the interesting things on that original autopsy was that the report said that he had a very minimal amount of codeine in his body. It was an amount basically commensurate with anyone taking a therapeutic dose of codeine at some of the doses recommended. But what you see is that the volume he had in his body, that people in the past had died from such volumes. We did the story that he had a potentially lethal dose of codeine in his body, and up until that.
Because Kirk had made up his mind that that's what he was going to do.
And we said, okay, we'll go ahead, but we really couldn't do it. And we really didn't try because it was an embarrassing situation to try and stop another hotel from being built.
He had me talk to Kirk on on many instances, trying to discourage him because of the underground testing, that although high-rise hotels would collapse, and Kirk just went about his business. And although he was always very friendly to Mr. Hughes, but he didn't pay a damn bit of attention to what we had to say.
Howard Hughes' irrational thought process affected the profitability of his own hotels.
The Tournament of Champions was at the Desert Inn. It was a regular annual golf tournament that brought in the best pros and a lot of stars and a lot of tourists. And Hughes canceled the Tournament of Champions.
And to think that you would take this kind of an asset and just say, we'll turn it over gratis to someone else if they'll take us off the hook, was incomprehensible to me. Yes, it bothered me. And of course, the fact that his reason was that it would create too many germs bothered me even more.
Hughes seemed to desire control of the whole state of Nevada as he sat in the darkened penthouse charting a map of his newest acquisitions, which included huge tracts of undeveloped land, the North Las Vegas airport, numerous mining claims, and a television station which was bought not only for investment purposes.
He wanted to watch the movies that he wanted to watch on television. He's watching a lot of television. And so I think maybe that was the motivation for buying that station.
Howard Hughes would watch the movies all night long, and as a general rule, he would have an aide call the next day complaining about the movie that ran last night. And this wasn't almost an everyday occurrence. It would happen a lot.
He was the one that decided what movies were going to be shown, what was available, and get this movie from California. And so it ended up that whatever movie was scheduled, if he didn't want to run that, he'd say, I want to see this.
As Hughes kept occupied by watching films broadcast by his newly acquired TV station, Bob Mayhew took on an increasingly powerful and influential role in the Hughes empire. Although he had never met Hughes, he now held the title of head of Hughes Nevada operations.
And consequently, we began using the Romaine Street office in Hollywood less and less.
He very strongly told me upon his arrival in Las Vegas that not only did he want a complete severance from the group, at 7,000 Romaine was Bill Gay and his associates. But he didn't want any of them to even come to Las Vegas.
And there was a power play going on between Bill Gay, Chester Davis, and Bob Mayhew. They were getting shunted farther aside, and Mayhew was coming up in the ranks.
Bill Gay, Frank William Gay, real name, but everybody called him Bill. Bill formulated his power. That's the correct word, power. He formulated his authority in that he controlled the aides and surrounded Howard Hughes.
The aides really became his family. And they supplied his food. They gave him the drugs he took every day, whether it was the Valium, or codeine, or whatever. They were his whole life support system.
Nobody had direct access to Hughes. The aides had direct access to Hughes, and Bill Gay had direct access to the aides. So if you wanted to talk to Hughes, you had to talk to Bill, and Bill in turn had to talk to the aides.
Hughes paid no attention to the double dealing taking place within his empire and continued to focus his attention on television. It was while watching TV that Hughes learned of a new round of atomic testing planned for Nevada. He became paralyzed with fear. He knew that unlike the germs that he fought to shield himself from, radiation could not be prevented from entering his carefully guarded environment. He declared war on the Atomic Energy Commission and pledged unlimited resources in stopping the tests.
That's one of the reasons he established that power in Nevada. He was, trying to pull a lot of political strings to get that atomic testing stopped.
I recall a particular test called, it was codenamed Boxcar. And it was a large underground nuclear test. I think they were figuring it was about equal to about 1 million tons of TNT, megaton. And Hughes absolutely wanted that thing stopped.
He bent every effort humanly possible to stop the test in Nevada at the test site, but we were unsuccessful in that regard. And we had to stop pushing too hard because it was becoming embarrassing.
I remember numerous briefings with the Department of Energy prior to the Boxcar detonation. And I know that the reason that occurred was on the other side of the street. The Hughes people are saying, you can't do this. You've got to stop this.
These were genuine concerns, and he wrote memo after memo on these subjects in trying to get the test stopped.
I say Nevada is no longer so desperate for mere existence that it has to accept and swallow with a smile poisonous, contaminated radioactive waste material more horrible than human excrement.
Unable to prevent the boxcar test, Hughes stepped up the battle and decided to garner support from whichever candidate would replace outgoing President Lyndon Johnson.
To put all this in true perspective, what happened is that Hughes made a decision on the same day, wrote me a memo telling me that he wanted me to see Richard Nixon as soon as possible and offer him unlimited help with his campaign because it was very important that he, Richard Nixon, be the next president of the United States. The same day, he sent me another memo saying to go see Hubert Humphrey and offer him unlimited support because it was very important that he be the next president of the United States.
In order to cover all bases, Hughes attempted a last-ditch effort to appeal to President Johnson.
Well, on 2 occasions, he wanted me to offer $1 million to then presidents to try to stop the underground testing. And by that time, I had reached a point in my world with him where I knew that I had to give him the impression that I was doing it for fear that he'd give the assignment to someone who'd be stupid enough to try.
By 1970, Hughes' health was clearly failing. As evident by logs maintained by the aides, he was taking an increasing amount of narcotics, including Emprin, an injectable form codeine. He was also ingesting massive amounts of Valium, referred to as blue bombers by Hughes. As a result of the drug use, he was often constipated and required frequent enemas. He insisted that his urine be preserved in jars and stored in the closet of the penthouse. He was sleeping more and eating less. His kidneys were shrinking as a result of his 20-year addiction to codeine. Hughes was too far gone for wife Jean Peters, who had not seen her husband in over 3.5 years. She filed for divorce. Another battle had begun between Bob Mayhew and Hughes' personal aides, who were tightening their grip on Hughes.
I began to get the impression that some of my memos were not getting through to him.
That's probably where Mayhew may have misjudged, is that they still controlled the flow of information. And that was the ultimate test. They determined what information got to Hughes and whether Mayhew's information got to Hughes. And that was very critical, absolutely.
Communication shut down. Nobody could communicate. I had a very important thing that I had to communicate through Mayhew, through Bob Mayhew, and Mayhew had no communication with me to shut us down. And you obviously sensed something wrong in that situation.
I think Mayhew was an empire builder, and I think he enjoyed the power and the position that he had in representing Hughes' interests. But I think he allocated to himself certain powers and privileges that were a little excessive.
I think jealousy, envy, and the fact that it looked like Mayhew was building his own empire within the Hughes empire that caused the demise of Bob Mayhew.
There's no doubt in my mind that they convinced him that I, in fact, had stolen money from him. And it breaks my heart to think that Howard Hughes died without knowing the difference.
On November 13th, 1970, a proxy came over the telecopier in the Desert Inn penthouse. It finalized an action that had been in the planning stages for months. Upon receiving Hughes' signature, the proxy effectively placed executive Bill Gay and Chester Davis, a Hughes TWA attorney, in control of the Hughes Nevada holdings. On November 25th, 1970, the Desert Inn penthouse was empty.
They took this man out of here Thanksgiving Eve. It was a very cold night, when his doctor had told me 2 days earlier that he was so sick that he would not move him from the Desert Inn to Sunrise Hospital, which is not a mile away, unless it were a dire emergency.
Well, he clearly was not in good physical shape when he left the desert. I mean, you are looking at now at someone who, who is consuming that large quantities of Valium, codeine, other drugs.
Curiously, it was later revealed that despite his critical illness, the amounts of codeine and Valium made available to and apparently used by Hughes during the weeks shortly before the proxy was obtained soared to among the highest levels of his life.
They took this man on this night, waltzed him down 9 flights of exterior fire escape, and brought him to Nellis Airport and flew him to the Bahamas.
The contact that law enforcement and that media and that the public had as far as Hughes was Bob Mayhew. And Bob Mayhew sincerely believed that Hughes was forced to leave here against his will.
But there was some confusion as to who was the leader, who was in power, who should the political people listen to.
I began getting calls from the casino managers saying that people were moving into the cages. I called the governor. I said, has this been cleared with you? No. I called the Gaming Control Board. Has this been cleared with you? No. Called the Gaming Commission? No.
Mayhew was saying, I'm in charge. Holiday, Davis, and Gay were saying, no, we're in charge. And it was like a war. It was going on. One camp was headquartered at the Sands, another camp was headquartered at the Frontier.
That confusion lasted for several months until it finally, the papers were sent in, powers of attorney were sent in to the government officials, placing Chester Davis and others in charge. So that was sufficient for them to feel comfortable that Mayhew was out and the new people were in.
I was sick. But then I realized that the battle was over. And I realized that somehow, whatever they had done, they had convinced him that I was on the wrong side of the fence.
In the beginning of December, Hughes settled into a penthouse at the Britannia Beach Hotel on Paradise Island, far removed from the troubles prompted by his leaving Las Vegas. Little did Hughes know that a man whom he had never met would cause a far greater problem. That man was Clifford Irving. Irving was an author with 8 books to his credit, the most popular being Fake, a story about art forgeries. In 1971, Irving himself was crafting a far more substantial hoax. Irving announced that he was collaborating with Hughes on an autobiography and produced forged letters purportedly written by Hughes, proving that he was a willing participant. The McGraw-Hill Publishing Company felt satisfied with the documents and advanced Irving $100,000 for publishing rights. Although the Hughes Tool Company denied the authenticity of the book, there was no way to bring Hughes out of isolation to prove it. Irving seemingly crafted the perfect scam, for no one had so much as seen Hughes for over a decade, and many questioned his very existence.
Then it got to be of concern to, I don't know whether it was probably government officials as well as the public. Does Howard Hughes exist? Is he alive?
There was a very serious thought in the public and among many people who were in areas of authority that thought he was probably dead, and these people were merely speaking for him. In an attempt to placate nervous Nevada gaming officials, Hughes placed a call to former Governor Paul Laxalt. Hughes' mental condition at the time seems questionable, given this memo that was passed to him before the call was placed. Your conversation should be exactly as the script was outlined to you. Make it most emphatic, with no discussion as to why, just a confirmation. However, it would be a good idea to mention your loss of confidence in Mayhew, and you could end by emphasizing your intention to return to Las Vegas after your business trip. One of them said to me, they said, wait a minute, he talked on the phone to your predecessor, and, he was satisfied. Well, I said, I'm not my predecessor. I like my predecessor, Paul Laxalt, but I can't tell on the phone whether this is Howard Hughes or not. In order to end the confusion caused by the Irving hoax, it was decided that Hughes would speak via telephone to a group of reporters who had known him before he became reclusive.
Hughes called me up from the Britannia Beach Hotel in the Bahamas the day before, and he says, I'm going to come out and expose Clifford Irving, big hoax. And he said, I'm going to have a press conference, which I'm talking on the phone. He said, I want you on it. We assembled in this room, and all the other reporters, asked all kinds of trick questions, make sure it was Howard Hughes and not Rich Little. And of course, when came my turn, I said, I know that voice anywhere. I've heard it too many times. It's etched in my memory.
When asked about Clifford Irving, Hughes simply responded, I don't know him. Reporters, however, took the liberty of asking far more personal questions.
Someone asked him about the report he had fingernails 10 inches long. And, he laughed about it. He says, how the hell could I write my name?
And all the correspondents chuckle at it as well. Like these stories are exaggerated. But the stories weren't exaggerated. He was just that loony at the time. But what is intriguing about him is that he knew the outside world would frown on him if they knew he was that way.
And I, at that time, made a remark that as far as I was concerned, there's nothing but a big circus. They said, oh yeah, that's his voice. Well, what's the big deal? Why don't we just see this voice? If everything is fine? And so we had some doubts on whether or not he was really in control of his company. For the next 7 months, Hughes and his aides circled the globe in exile of corporate lawsuits, and the ever-present horde of photographers attempting to snap a picture of the elusive billionaire. In each location, Hughes returned to his familiar world of a darkened hotel suite. He was constantly drugged and spent most of his waking hours viewing films projected on a screen at the foot of his bed. Hughes was oblivious to the ongoing TWA lawsuit and was in no condition to fight as executives pressured him to sell his namesake, the Hughes Tool Division.
TWA ultimately sued Hughes and was awarded a substantial judgment. And Hughes Tool Company, which had provided all the money through the years to fund all of Howard's various enterprises, from the filmmaking to the airplanes to everything, Howard gets enormous pressure to sell it. And this is at a time when he's really totally isolated, under the control of the people who are around him every day.
I'm sure he had long-standing feelings of closeness, and he probably had some regret in having to let it go.
He lost roughly a third of $1 million as a result of that sale. It was probably one of the worst business decisions ever made. In the 5 years after he sold the company, he made more than he received for it, which was something like $150 million. And this is one of the times you see the really tragic side of Hughes's life, because he's convinced he has to sell it. He sells it. The judgment, of course, is later overturned. He really didn't have to.
One person who gained from the sale was Bill Gay, who now became executive vice president.
The title of president was reserved to Howard Hughes. Everything Bill said was supposedly based on word from on high. It wasn't until after Hughes's death that we began to wonder if anybody ever did, if Hughes ever did make those pronouncements.
The new executive committee decided to consolidate the remaining Hughes Nevada holdings into an umbrella corporation.
The new company that is created for the remainder of his holdings is called Summa Corporation. And when he first sees the name, he doesn't even understand what it is.
If you stop and consider, all of the companies that Hughes owned prior to Summa were all Hughes. There was Hughes Aircraft, Hughes Helicopters, Hughes this, Hughes Oil Company, Hughes Tool Company, Hughes, whatever it was, had Hughes in the name. Summa suddenly became the first company that didn't have a Hughes name on it, Summa.
It's one of those really sad points when you realize here is his, the business that provided the basis for everything that he did is gone. In the surviving business, he doesn't even know what the name means.
In March of 1973, Hughes moved again, this time to the Inn on the Park Hotel in London. He briefly broke out of his self-imposed isolation and agreed to a face-to-face meeting with Governor O'Callaghan.
We went up late at night. It's after midnight to meet with him. And they brought him in. He walked in, and we shook hands. And we sat down, and I asked the questions that had to be asked to make sure that that we had the right person. Here's a man who was alive. It was his money, and he wanted to do this with his money, and that's fine.
He had to find someplace where a now deteriorating individual whose health is deteriorating could, in fact, live easily. His last protocol was Mexico.
Hughes was told that he had been moved to Acapulco because drugs were no longer available in Freeport. In actuality, the drugs were supplied by a New York pharmaceutical house.
He is no longer probably mentally in control, of his complete faculties. It would certainly appear that way when you're looking at the memos he's writing, when you're looking at all the drugs he's consuming.
I'm not so sure the new people who came on board thought about protecting him at all. They may have thought only about themselves and how they could enhance their own life.
He also saw this by virtue of the fact that the people back in those days trying to get him to, well, where's your will? Get the will all in shape. There was a lot of concern.
Hughes never gave anything of the company away. He never gave anything of the company away. So everybody was trying to get a secure position.
Those aides, some of those aides at that time were making $75,000 a year for delivering messages, taking telephone calls. It seemed like a lot of money to me, but if you go back in time, and now your median family income, the average family in the U.S. was earning $12,000. So if you were looking at that today, you would be paying these people to do these errand jobs almost $250,000.
I can go down that whole list. If I were in the headhunting business, I don't know where I'd start to find any one of them a $10,000 job.
The last days of Howard Hughes lie in sharp contrast to a man who once controlled his life with such vigor. Hughes lay so weakened, he could no longer muster the strength to inject himself with codeine.
There was a story on the wire about a doctor in Mexico that had examined Hughes, and he was the first indication that I read, this is prior to any books that were published, that Hughes was definitely in very poor physical condition when he got to him.
He's got bed sores all over him. He's got a gaping sore on his head, bruises. And although the doctor doesn't see this, he's got broken hypodermic needles in his arm.
And it wasn't the kind of physical condition that had just developed during a week or so of illness. It was the kind of physical condition that apparently developed over many years of either a lifestyle or neglect.
The doctor's just looking at him physically and saying, why isn't this man in the hospital? And that's really a sad picture of a person who has deteriorated to that point, and no one really seems to care.
And it's not the Howard Hughes that I knew. He was helpless, really helpless.
Probably the most striking thing is this picture of a man who basically is all alone.
Well, there are the aides around him, and people who have been around him for a long period of time. There isn't what you would call anybody really close to him.
I hate to think so, but I think he probably was very sad at the end. He had no more TWA, no more Spruce Goose, no more studio. He just had a lot of money.
On April 5th, 1976, Hughes slipped into a coma. His body lay still, except for tremors in the muscles of his face. Hughes' personal physician was called to the penthouse, but instead of immediately attending to the comatose Hughes, he spent nearly 2 hours rummaging through the files kept in the suite.
He began shredding documents that were in the hotel. And I have a feeling that there was a lot of this going on throughout the Hughes organization in those last days. A lot of documents were being destroyed. And the question always is, what were they and why?
4 hours after the doctor arrived, Hughes was loaded into an air ambulance chartered for Houston, where arrangements had been made for a hospital admission.
He had a beard, long, scraggly type hair, gray hair, and just a very shriveled up type of appearance, like he'd lost a lot of weight.
He looked almost dead when he boarded the airplane, because his eyes were wide open and there was really very little life at all, if any, left in him. He was alive, though, because I did notice his mouth moved just a little bit once or twice. As we were taxiing into the customs ramp, the doctor in the back said, just take your time. There's no need to hurry any longer. That's how we knew at that time. He died apparently as we were descending into Houston, just as we were coming in, approaching the airport.
The preliminary autopsy findings demonstrated that Mr. Hughes died of chronic renal disease.
One of the interesting things on that original autopsy was that the report said that he had a very minimal amount of codeine in his body. It was a amount basically commensurate with anyone taking a therapeutic dose of codeine at some dose that's recommended. But what you see is that the volume he had in his body, that people in the past had died from such volumes. We did the story. He had a potentially lethal dose of codeine in his body, and up until that point, that hadn't been reported.
Also concealed in the original autopsy reports were these x-rays, showing the remains of hypodermic needles that had been broken off in both arms.
I think you look at the man's physical condition when he arrives in Houston aboard the plane. And I think anybody has to ask the question, how does someone get in this condition?
Can you imagine a man with 7 broken hypodermic needles in his arm? A man who's responsible for having built the biggest medical foundation in the history of man, having a sore that oozes, a bone that's sticking out of his shoulder.
This is not the picture of someone who's being really careful. And the question is why?
I've often said that people have asked me, do you think they killed this man? And my answer is a very, I believe, fair one. If sheer negligence qualifies as a weapon, yes, they did.
I'm a drug mule from the cartel.
You were never a real father.
I was on the road 60 hours a week to provide for this family. This is the last one. The Mule. Own the digital movie now.
What we got here is a failure to communicate.
You knew exactly what he wanted to do.
I don't want to be hoggish, Lon. You want a piece of it?
Well, Paul is a class act.
My God, you are some beautiful woman.
He's a totally unpretentious person.
Never say never. He loved to have fun.
$500 says you choke right now.
You think this boy is a hustler?
Michael, open your eyes. This is the life we chose, the life we lead. And there is only one guarantee. None of us will see heaven.
In a continuing career that has lasted over half a century, Paul Newman has defined a new kind of American hero. Tough, confident, and charming.
Are you putting me on?
I don't think so.
Often, he played loners whose morality forced them outside the system and the law.
Manos arriba! They got him! Ah, you're so damn smart, you read it.
Roles that stood in sharp contrast to the actor's stunning looks and clear blue eyes.
Well, now, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a feeling I rile you. I mean, me being so mean and dirty and all.
He's the kind of person who appreciates and craves a challenge and really only appreciates what he's able to accomplish with hard work.
Off-screen, Newman has become equally famous as an entrepreneur, a race car driver, a political activist, and one of America's leading philanthropists, whose image has come to represent both quality and integrity.
He's very giving. He's very gracious. He's a very generous man.
Paul Newman was born on January 26, 1925, the second son of Arthur and Teresa Newman. Paul grew up in a comfortable suburb of Shaker Heights in Cleveland, Ohio.
Shaker Heights was a great place for a kid to grow up. There were big estate-type homes around the Shaker Lakes area, and then as you went back away from the lakes, there were smaller homes like Paul's and mine, but not bad. We led such a play life as kids pre-World War II. We did practical jokes together. We rode bikes together, and Paul would come over almost every afternoon, and we would play pool up in the pool. And he was just short of marvelous.
Paul's father, Arthur, was of German Jewish descent. He was a partner in a successful sporting goods company and an intimidating figure to the young Paul, who considered his father both brilliant and emotionally reticent. Newman's Catholic-raised mother, Teresa, was an avid theater goer who encouraged her youngest son to try acting. At age 7, Paul played a court jester in a school production of Robin Hood, singing a song written by his Uncle Joe.
Joe Newman was a Cleveland famous poet. He was also a playwright and very much into the arts. Paul's father, Arthur, was more the bookkeeper, businessman type. They owned this wonderful sporting goods store, which was a very, very prominent, well-to-do business.
As Paul grew into a handsome teenager, his good looks won him female admirers everywhere he went. But to his friends, he never showed an ounce of conceit.
My mother was absolutely entranced with Paul's looks. She said that he should be in the movies. Paul Newman had absolutely no idea whatsoever that he was good looking. He had no idea that he had these gorgeous, piercing eyes. He was the most unaffected person I've ever met in my entire life.
An average student who avoided studies, Paul drifted from job to job after graduating from high school. Unlike his hard-working father, the easygoing Paul gave little thought to a future career. He took work as an encyclopedia salesman, succeeding thanks to his natural, easygoing charm.
Paul Newman could sell anything. He could sell anybody anything. He sold a ton of Collier's encyclopedias. I was a stiff. I probably sold no more than 2 sets or 3 sets. I believe that he was so successful that he ended up selling his route or his business for over $500 at the time, and that was real money then.
By 1943, with World War II raging, Paul grew restless and uncertain about his future and enlisted in the Naval Air Corps.
During the 4 months before he was inducted, he killed time at Ohio University, ostensibly majoring in business, but majoring in beer drinking and chasing girls. As a young man in college, he was known for downing the suds a lot. After that, he was called up and he was sent to Yale University for officers training, where he had intended to become a pilot, but it was discovered that those beautiful blue eyes were colorblind, so he was unable to do that.
Determined to serve, Paul enlisted in the regular Navy as a radio operator on torpedo planes in the South Pacific, based in Hawaii, Guam, and Okinawa. In 1946, Newman returned to Shaker Heights. The 21-year-old enrolled as a freshman at Ohio's distinguished Kenyon College.
Kenyon College was an Episcopal seminary. We were forced to go to Mass on Sundays, or to at least attend church. Paul was half Jewish, half Catholic, and I was all Jewish. And this didn't bother either of us at all. Neither of us were terribly interested either way, but we had to do it in order to pass.
Matured by his Navy experience, Paul devoted himself to literature and drama. He also showed a passion for sports, joining the football team as a linebacker. One night after football practice, high spirits got out of hand. After a fight in a local bar, Paul and some teammates were arrested.
When I went to Kenyon College, which is a wonderful school, there was sort of a brawl that we got involved in which several of us wound up in the clink. And as a result, I was thrown off the football squad. And since I had to do something with my time, I started acting.
The young war veteran was now determined to make good. For the next 2 years, Paul put all his energy into acting, grabbing the lead in his college production of The Front Page. In 1949, the 24-year-old graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree. His father expected Paul to return to Shaker Heights and enter the family business. But Paul wanted to prove his school acting triumphs could translate into a career. 2 hours after graduation, Newman headed to Williams Bay, Wisconsin for a season in summer stock. He next moved on to Woodstock, Illinois, where he joined the renowned Woodstock Players.
Woodstock was a proving ground, do a different show each week, 3 performances, and working 12 to 15 hours a day to get everything else. We did everything but sell tickets. He loved to have fun. And there were 3 things that I remember vividly that he liked: beer, popcorn, and I think celery. Somehow I have a memory of him chewing on celery. But sometimes when we were building his sets, he would draw a line in the middle of the stage. And we would be stripped to the waist. We'd each have a bottle of beer. We played what he called bump bellies. We'd try and knock the other guy over the line. And he had to get him a beer, you know. And he loved to have popcorn. We always had popcorn on the set. He made it, like to make it fresh. That certainly led to something, didn't it?
At Woodstock, Paul was a serious student of acting. But he had time for other things besides studying. By 1949, he'd begun a serious relationship with Jackie Witt, a vivacious actress with a sharp sense of humor. Shortly after they began dating, the two were married. But just as Newman's career seemed to be getting started, his father became gravely ill. Paul returned home to Shaker Heights to help with the family business. By now, Jackie was expecting their first child, and her husband was becoming a family man with serious responsibilities. In 1950, Arthur Newman died, having never seen his son perform professionally.
Paul had always felt he disappointed his father. He hadn't been serious and diligent about his studies. He hadn't succeeded as an athlete. He hadn't succeeded in anything as yet.
4 months later, Paul's son Scott was born, and the aspiring performer knew he had to make a choice once and for all between life as a prosperous shopkeeper or the insecurity of a career in acting. Paul made the difficult decision to sell the family business and enter Yale University.
He enrolled in Yale's Graduate School of Drama as a directing major, intending to go back to Kenyon College as a directing teacher. He never intended to become a professional actor. He left with $4,000, his wife, his son. They moved into a frame house in New Haven, and Jackie was staying home with their son while Paul was working and going to school. During a production in the Little Theater, a husband and wife team of agents spotted him and gave him their card and invited him to come to Manhattan.
It was a life-changing opportunity for the young Newman. After only 6 months at Yale, Paul had been offered a chance to become a professional actor in New York City.
Hey, what is it, Sergeant? It's the photo lab, sir. They say
Get to the point.
He keeled over, sir. All of a sudden. He's dead, sir. He's frozen to death.
Soon after his arrival in New York, Paul Newman began finding work as a performer in a city that was an actor's mecca. Post-war playwrights like Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller had captured a new audience for the American theater. Manhattan was also the home of the Actors Studio, where a naturalistic approach to acting was being taught. It was called The Method, and it was being embraced by such talents as Marlon Brando and James Dean.
He became a member of the Actors Studio inadvertently by helping out an actress, doing a scene with her from a Tennessee Williams play. And they were so taken with Paul Newman that he became part of the Actors Studio, and the actress never did get in.
Using The Method, Paul learned how to channel his strongly emotional approach to acting into a more subtle performing style.
I remember someone who's helped me a lot in my early days, and we were just rehearsing a scene, and I remember she stopped me with an absolute rifle shot of a clap, and grabbed a hold of my shirt and said, "You are not thinking, you are just thinking, you are thinking." And if you watch actors, you can tell those who don't necessarily indicate in broad strokes what's going on, but you can really see in their eyes that they are going through a process.
While attending the studio, Newman was pleased to land his first big Broadway role.
Paul came into New York and just accidentally ran into this third actor, and he said, "Listen, I've got to go up and see somebody at the William Morris office." And they went up to the William Morris office, and he went in to see an agent. He came out about 10 minutes later or 15 minutes later, and Paul wasn't there. And he said to the receptionist, he said, "Did you see the good-looking blonde fellow that was sitting?" He says, "Oh, he's in that office there." And the door opened out. Out came Paul, shaking hands with an agent, and Josh Logan. And he was cast in Picnic.
It's funny because Josh Logan wouldn't let him play the lead because he didn't have enough sexual threat. So he was cast in Picnic as the hometown boy who eventually loses his girl to this drifter.
Picnic proved to be one of the Broadway season's most successful plays. Newman also got the chance to work closely with several rising performers. Among them, a talented young actress named Joanne Woodward.
She was a Southern belle, a very beautiful, extremely intelligent woman with a biting kind of wit, and very determined to succeed in her career. Joanne was understudying the female roles, and they were very drawn to each other, but Paul Newman was married and he had a family, and he is a man who took being a father and a husband seriously.
Newman's Broadway success in Picnic also won him admirers on the West Coast, in Hollywood. Talent scouts at Warner Brothers saw in Paul the potential of a new Marlon Brando, and in 1953, the 28-year-old was offered a studio contract in Los Angeles for an impressive $1,000 a week. Although Paul's New York friends warned him that Hollywood was no place for a serious actor, he was intrigued and ready to accept the challenge of filmmaking.
7, take 1, sound 6.
In Los Angeles, Newman tested with fellow Actors Studio alumnus James Dean for the highly anticipated movie East of Eden.
The point of whether I go for the girls, though, you know.
Oh, you think the girls go to the gym?
Oh,
Look at
great.
Size them up.
Kiss me. Can't hear. Yeah?
Okay, now ride the camera.
Dean was cast in the film, but to Paul's disappointment, he got the lead in a different movie, one that nearly became his first and last.
You stand in the streets of ancient Antioch, where Caesar's legions proclaimed his pagan power, and the lash enforced his law.
The 1954 drama, The Silver Chalice, told the fictional story of a Greek slave who designed the cup used by Christ during the Last Supper.
Helen, I love you. You must leave Simon and come to Rome with me.
I did a memorable film called The Silver Chalice. Probably had the distinction of being the worst film that was made during the entire decade of the 50s.
It would have been very easy, Deborah, when we were in the desert, to yield to the temptation to be your husband.
I confess I was trying to take advantage of my last hour alone with you.
He did The Silver Chalice, for heaven's sakes. He looked like a girl in a skirt.
Basil, the pagan, whose gifted hands shaped the silver chalice.
Such a terrible picture. Paul was always very embarrassed about that film. He was running around in a little jersey tunic halfway to his knees.
Paul was so embarrassed by his skimpy costume and wooden performance, friends had to get him drunk before he agreed to see the film.
It was a disaster. To make matters worse, in the adjoining soundstage, East of Eden was filming, and Paul Newman had been the other contender with James Dean for the lead, whereas Paul Newman was pretty much panned for the role he played in The Silver Chalice. He foresaw that was going to happen, and immediately upon finishing filming, wired his agents asking them to get me back on a New York stage quick. And luckily for him, he went up for and got a role in The Desperate Hours, where he played a burglar and received critical raves for it.
Newman also earned good notices in another medium. By 1955, the golden age of television had arrived. Paul was a standout opposite Eva Marie Saint and Frank Sinatra in a live TV broadcast of Thornton Wilder's classic play, Our Town.
Live TV was the best training in the world. We had 2 weeks rehearsal. We were ready to have an audience, which was the television audience. It was like doing a play.
Can I carry your book for you?
It's not very far, thank you. Paul was very dear in Our Town, very sensitive. He's just such a fine actor. I've been spoiled rotten from those days.
Do you, George, take this woman, Emily, to be your wedded wife? I do.
Whether on television, on stage, or in Hollywood, Paul hungered for the kind of serious parts offered to Marlon Brando and James Dean. Newman's frustration spilled over into his home and put a strain on his marriage. His drinking increased. But in 1955, the actor did find a role he was literally willing to fight for. That of prize fighter Rocky Graziano in the film adaptation of the gritty autobiography, Somebody Up There Likes Me. But Newman was not the first choice of director Robert Wise.
Well, originally, James Dean was supposed to have done the part. He had read the book and liked it very much. Depending on the outcome of the screenplay, which Ernest Lehman had been assigned to do, he said he would like to do it.
But before the screenplay was finished, James Dean was killed in a car accident on a California highway.
Paul came in as a suggestion. I met him. It seemed to be fine. I thought he would be just fine for the role, and that was it.
Newman launched into a rigorous fitness regime. He also studied the real Rocky Graziano day and night, both in and out of the ring.
One of the advantages we had was the fact that we had Rocky to model after. Paul and I went back to New York, and we spent quite a lot of time with Rocky. We went down to the Lower East Side with him and walked around all these haunts where he hung out, met a lot of his former buddies, and we studied. Paul studied Rocky. The result, I think, turned out to be one of the best characterizations that Paul's ever done on the screen.
Well, what about them other guys smearing it all over the front page? What a rat I am. What a liar. What a no-good East Side bum I am. Sure. But Graziano is a no-good criminal, a coward, a yellow rat. Remember that. Graziano's the scum of the slums. You'll never...
How wonderful the opportunity to play a Rocky Graziano so early in his film career, when he really was looked upon as a gorgeous leading man. And he made that a character role.
I'm going to tell you something, soldier. There's no place in this man's army for a wise guy. Do you understand that?
Wait a minute, you bum. I mean, you may be a captain and all that. You don't impress me so hot. You're so tough, come on outside.
Soldier, are you just plain crazy?
Maybe I am crazy with being sick and tired of this creep joint, but at least I ain't yellow.
Somebody Up There Likes Me opened to excellent reviews, although Paul's work was overlooked by the Motion Picture Academy.
We were very surprised when he didn't get a nomination. As a matter of fact, we had a little ceremony down at my house out here in Santa Monica, the night of the actual Oscars, and I had a sketch artist work with me. He made up a little phony kind of Oscar thing, little figure like that, and we called it an Oscar, and we presented it to Paul that night at the house.
But by Oscar night of 1957, Paul Newman had much more on his mind than awards. The married actor had fallen in love. In 1957, Paul Newman's personal and professional life would undergo a major change. The rising film star had reconnected with actress Joanne Woodward, who'd appeared with him 5 years earlier in the stage play Picnic.
Fate kept bringing them together, and their attraction for each other was very hard to resist.
As his marriage to Jackie Witt disintegrated, Paul began a very private love affair with Joanne. The actor was guilt-ridden over the romance, but the powerful connection between the pair was undeniable. Woodward was beautiful, talented, and like Paul, an alumnus of the Actors Studio. Since Picnic, Joanne had also become a movie star after her Oscar-winning performance in the drama The Three Faces of Eve.
Well, I never seen you take a drink before.
Honey, there are a lot of things you never seen me do before. That's no sin I don't do.
By 1957, Paul Newman realized that his marriage was over. Separated from Jackie, he moved out of his home to begin a new life with Joanne Woodward. That year, 20th Century Fox decided to bring Paul and Joanne's incendiary chemistry to the big screen.
You're gonna wake up in the morning smiling.
That's not enough. Do you understand me? That is not nearly enough.
The film was the sultry Southern drama, The Long Hot Summer, adapted from several stories by author William Faulkner. Shot on location in Louisiana and Mississippi, the movie co-starred Orson Welles and Angela Lansbury, and it crackled with erotic energy.
I am no trembling little rabbit full of smoldering, unsatisfied desires.
Is that so?
Yes, that's so.
We weren't married when we did Long Hot Summer. It led to all sorts of interesting things in hotel rooms.
There was no need to say anything about that.
Okay.
I spent my whole life around men who push and shove and shout and think they can make anything happen just by being aggressive. And I'm not anxious to have another one around the place.
Miss Clara, you slam a door in a man's face before he even knocks on it.
I consider both of them as extremely able actors. And even at that time, Paul had had a certain amount of experience, and he was very comfortable within himself, within his own beauty. He was like a young god.
Clara? Clara? Clara?
And there was something about Joanne that countered it in the best possible way.
Put them things down, Miss Clara, because I want to kiss you. I'm going to show you how simple it is. You please me, and I'll please you. I was troubling you. It's all those boys hollering for you there tonight.
And they seemed to have such a total understanding of each other that they were able to translate their own personal feelings and maneuver it around to work in scenes where they were at each other's throats or falling under each other's spells.
All right, you proved it. I'm human.
Yes, ma'am, you're human, all right.
During production, Newman and Woodward beat a retreat each weekend for nearby New Orleans.
We also bought a bed, or I bought a bed. I was so excited about this bed, this brass bed, which we found in an antique shop. And it was quite large for a brass bed. And the antique dealer said, well, the reason it is that large is it was made for a whorehouse. And I was so excited by that, I said, oh my heavens, I have to buy this, which I did. And it's upstairs in our bedroom. We've had it ever since.
Released in 1958, The Long Hot Summer received excellent reviews and became one of the top-grossing movies of the year. And by the time the film was completed, Paul and Jackie Witt had finalized their divorce. He and Joanne wasted no time in making their new life together official.
Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman went to Las Vegas and had a wonderfully tacky Las Vegas wedding with people who were appearing in the various casinos as witnesses, like people like Sophie Tucker and Edie Gourmet.
It was a comedy of error.
It really was. It was hilarious. The El Rancho Vegas.
And for some reason, we turned around as we were being married, and there was Edie Gourmet and some other people. I think they came to this cabin outside the regular part of the room because they thought it belonged to the owner, and they just kind of came in mistakenly. There was a wedding going on, and they just sat there and watched the whole thing and came over and said hello at the end.
People we never had seen before.
The Newmans settled in a modest apartment in New York's East 80s. The couple's house guests were some of the brightest wits of their generation, including writers like Gore Vidal, Christopher Isherwood, and Tennessee Williams. Paul and Joanne relished their stimulating company, especially after a long stay in Hollywood, where Newman had become one of the industry's most dynamic new stars.
I feel all the time like a cat on a hot tin roof.
And jump off the roof, Maggie, jump off.
In 1959, Paul received his first Oscar nomination for his riveting performance the previous year as a sexually confused husband in Tennessee Williams' Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, co-starring Elizabeth Taylor.
I don't mind making a fool of myself over you.
Well, I mind. I feel embarrassed for you.
Feel embarrassed? But I can't live on this way.
You agreed to accept that condition.
I know I did, but I can't.
The night of the Oscars, speculation ran that the 34-year-old actor would match his wife Joanne's success the previous year. Instead, the award went to David Niven for Separate Tables. But although Newman didn't win, he and Woodward were now considered Hollywood's golden couple. And Paul's popularity gave him the courage to spend $500,000 to buy out the rest of his Warner Brothers contract. Newman was now able to look for offers that were more personally lucrative as well as creatively challenging.
Paul Newman resisted being praised for his astounding good looks and being packaged as a gorgeous piece of beefcake.
The thing about Hollywood in those days was once you got typed, then that's pretty much where you stayed. It's pretty hard to escape the niche that they put you in.
Well, this is the award that Charlie Schnee and Bobby Wise gave Paul last year because he wasn't nominated for somebody of their liking. It says, the Schnee-Wise Oscar Award to Paul Newman for best portraying a terrible, no good, blankety blank, for turning him into a charming and lovable sprite, and for thereby doing what Lincoln said could never be done, i.e. fooling all of the people all of the time.
As Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward shuttled between New York and Los Angeles, they balanced their bi-coastal careers with the demands of family. In 1959, they welcomed their first daughter, Eleanor. And despite his worldwide fame, Newman stayed remarkably grounded and unimpressed by celebrity.
I'm always puzzled by this talk about star image. I think there's people who are writers or barbers or mechanics or race car drivers have certain recognizable personalities, and I don't think just because they happen to be on the screen that it makes them any more exceptional.
It does rather irritate Joanne, however, right in the middle of a discussion when I get up and cook a large batch of popcorn and open a quart of beer and build a fire.
At 3 o'clock in the morning.
But
Great popcorn.
Now content in his personal life, Paul returned to the Broadway stage, co-starring with Geraldine Page in Tennessee Williams' new play, Sweet Bird of Youth. His performance as a selfish gigolo who exploits an aging actress won raves from critics, and it was preserved on screen 3 years later in a well-received film adaptation.
I had my picture on the cover of Life magazine. Oh, wow! And at the same time, I was employing my other talent, lovemaking.
That may be the only talent you ever truly meant for.
In 1960, Paul and Joanne brought their off-screen chemistry once again to the movies, co-starring in From the Terrace, a sophisticated drama about boardroom and sexual politics.
Stop it.
What?
Because I am engaged to Jim Roper.
You're married?
But I'm engaged to him.
But you didn't say you were married.
Look, are you going to row me back to shore? Am I going to have to swim back?
Swim.
Paul couldn't help but connect with the part of a World War II Navy veteran pressured by his father to enter the family business.
The job at the mill was going to be yours because the mill would be yours, and I hoped the friendship would come out of that.
Would come out of what? Being your errand boy, the boss's son, your lackey? You never asked me what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be. Now I'm supposed to go into the mill with you. What for? To please you, that's all. You'd cripple me for the rest of my life. You'd like that, wouldn't you? You don't think I can make it on my own?
You're not big enough to even walk in my shadow, and you never will be.
By now, Paul was making over $100,000 a film on projects like Exodus, director Otto Preminger's epic about the formation of Israel, co-starring Eva Marie Saint.
An epic of our time, the birth of a nation.
You can't fight the whole British Empire with 600 people. It isn't possible.
How many Minutemen did you have at Concord the day they fired the shot heard around the world?
I don't know.
77.
He's serious, but he's not solemn. Some actors are serious and very solemn, but he's very serious in his work, and I'm sure in his life. But there's a lightness to him and tongue-in-cheek sense of humor, which I find so attractive. I think you have to have a lot of ego to be an actor, and I've worked with some wonderful actors, But somehow with Paul, the ego does not get in the way. So he can be so wonderful with the other actors and the crew.
For the half-Jewish, half-Christian actor, the story of Exodus helped Newman connect with a heritage he hardly knew. By 1961, the 35-year-old also felt it was time to take a risk with another tough, realistic part, like the role of Rocky Graziano in Somebody Up There Likes Me. The character he found was that of Fast Eddie Felsen, the film The Hustler.
Maybe it'd be better if we just leave each other alone.
Brash, arrogant, but undeniably charming, Fast Eddie gave Paul his best role to date. Newman played a scheming pool hustler who takes his one big shot against the legendary Minnesota Fats, played by Jackie Gleason.
You like to gamble, Eddie? Gamble money on pool games? That's what you and I shoot a game of straight pool. $100? Well, you shoot big-time pool, Fats. I mean, that's what everybody says, you shoot big-time pool. Let's make it $200 a game. Now I know why they call you Fast Eddie. Eddie, you talk my kind of talk.
The Hustler was the first film where the Paul Newman rebel persona really solidified. The anguished, alienated loner that cannot function in society, but who slides by on his talent and his native charm. It was a perfect role for him, and he fitted it beautifully.
That's cash. You punk, you two-bit punk. Come on, pay up, $100. You quitting, friend?
Yeah, I'm quitting. I guess Paul Newman thought, well, after all this pool shooting, you know, he really admired Jack, but I guess he was overcome with his own ability in shooting pool. And he says, he bet Jack $50 on a pool game, you know. So naturally, Jackie killed him. I don't think he even got a shot. So they bet $50 on it. So the next day, Paul Newman come on and put $50 in pennies all over this pool table.
The Hustler was both a critical and box office success, and Newman earned his second Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. For Paul, The Hustler signaled the beginning of a highly productive and prolific period of work.
All right, smart guy. I'll take you instead. Oh, I don't want to be hoggish. Lon, you want a piece of him? Well.
Newman earned a third Oscar nomination for the drama HUD, co-starring Patricia Neal and Melvin Douglas. The film gave Paul another outstanding part, a womanizer whose callous exterior covers hidden vulnerability.
Did you ever ask?
Well, the only question I ever ask anyone is, what time is your husband coming home?
I'd say I've been asked with a little more finesse in my time.
I'll bring you a 2-pound box of candy and maybe a bottle of perfume from the drugstore.
Oh, thanks. I've done my time with one cold-blooded bastard. I'm not looking for another.
It's too late, honey. You already found him.
Newman saw the part not from the vantage point of a movie star, but as another challenging character role.
Even in a role such as HUD, where he was supposedly an unregenerate scoundrel with no redeeming qualities whatsoever, there's some kind of integrity of character that always seems to shine through.
If you look at HUD, you know, he goes to pieces at the end of that film. And very vulnerable.
I was no bundle left on a doorstep. Wasn't found in no bull rushes. You got the same feelings below your belt as any other man. So you got stuck with me for a son.
Although HUD was another triumph for Newman, not all of Paul's choices during the 1960s would be as successful. But the star preferred to risk and fail rather than rely on his endlessly discussed physical beauty. And by 1966, as a new youth movement began to sweep across America, Paul's film persona as a social rebel would help him transition from a respected actor into a cultural icon.
What series of startling events could come to a climax in a scene like this?
In 1966, 41-year-old Paul Newman tackled another creative change of pace, Torn Curtain, a Cold War thriller directed by Alfred Hitchcock and co-starring Julie Andrews.
You're a scientist or a teacher?
You're a scientist, and you're supposed to respect natural order in all things. Breakfast comes before lunch. Ow! And marriage should come before a honeymoon cruise.
The unpretentious Newman and the highly formal Hitchcock proved a creative mismatch, and the critically panned film was a box office failure. But Paul quickly rebounded with a series of well-chosen hits that helped redefine the image of the traditional American hero. The actor brought an exciting blend of cynicism and bold sexuality to such films as the 1966 detective drama Harper, co-starring Lauren Bacall and Robert Wagner.
Harper actively participates with qualified young people's programs.
You ready to break that down?
You want it?
You really mean it?
Go ahead.
Hot damn.
The character in Harper was pretty close to me. I didn't have to do a lot of work for that.
People often ask Harper what he does this kind of crummy work for.
What do you do this kind of crummy work for, anyway?
Are you trying to be funny? I do it because I believe in the United Nations and Southeast Asia, and so long as there's a Siberia, you'll find Lou Harper on a job.
1967's Cool Hand Luke gave Paul one of his most popular roles of the decade, playing a charismatic chain gang prisoner whose spirit remains unbroken despite brutal treatment from the law.
You're gonna get used to wearing them chains after a while, Luke. But you never stop listening to them clinking. Because they're gonna remind you of what I've been saying.
Wish you'd stop being so good to me, Captain.
Don't you ever talk that way to me. Never! Never! What we've got here is failure to communicate.
Newman's fourth Oscar nomination for Cool Hand Luke made him one of the most nominated non-winners in Academy Awards history. Many speculated that Paul was so good he made it look too easy. But if his professional work went unrewarded, his personal life was extremely secure. Now 42, Paul shared with Joanne an antique-filled carriage house in Westport, Connecticut with their family, which had grown to include two more daughters, Melissa and Claire. Determined to accept new challenges, in 1968, Newman made a successful switch to directing, guiding Joanne to an Oscar-nominated performance in the drama Rachel, Rachel. Paul enjoyed a life most actors could only dream of. His salary per picture had climbed to $750,000 for films like the intriguing Western Hombre.
Hombre means man, and Paul Newman is hombre.
Like many of his characters, Newman was cool, independent, and confident. So confident, he wasn't afraid to be funny on screen.
Manos arriba! They got him up! Skip on down! Arriba! Skip on down! Todos ustedes arismense a la pared. They're against the wall already! Donde? Ah, you're so damn smart, you read it.
The comedy drama, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, was based on the true story of two legendary Old West outlaws. At first, Paul was slated to play the Sundance Kid, with Steve McQueen slated for Butch. But Newman and director George Roy Hill had other ideas. They wanted a struggling but promising actor named Robert Redford.
Paul, I was told, although I hadn't met him, that he liked my work as an actor and was interested in taking the chance on working with an unknown, even though we're about, 12 years apart in age.
Finally, George and I just bulldozed, and the record speaks for itself. I mean, it was gangbusters.
Sundance, when we're done, if he's dead, you're welcome to stay.
Listen, I don't mean to be a sore loser, but when it's done, if I'm dead, kill him. Love to. No, not yet. Not until me and Harvey get the rules straightened out.
Rules? In a knife fight? No rules. What?
Well, if there ain't gonna be any rules, let's get the fight started. Someone count 1, 2, 3, go.
1, 2, 3, go.
The on and off-screen chemistry between Newman and Robert Redford was instant. Both actors were involved in political causes, had strong family ties, and both hated being sex symbols.
We had so much fun doing it. That has to be probably the most fun on any film I've had. I remember saying at one time, well, I almost felt guilty getting paid for it. It's not quite true. Working with Paul was great, and we developed a lifelong friendship as a result of it.
Chemistry is an ephemeral thing. You can't discuss it. You can't describe it. We drank some beers together and kicked a lot of dirt and played a few practical jokes and enjoyed each other's invention on the set and imagination.
Raindrops keep falling on my head, and just like the guy whose feet are too big for his bed, nothing seems to fit. Those raindrops are falling on my head, they keep falling.
I think Paul Newman knows more jokes than any living human being. And he and Redford had sort of a running gag throughout this film. They were sort of one-upping each other all the time.
What are you doing? Stealing your woman?
Take her.
Take her. Oh, you're a romantic bastard, I'll give you that.
Redford was sensational, and he exploded, and that was fairly clear in the Daily. Paul's producer went to Paul and said, he's getting too many close-ups. I'm going to end that. Newman said, don't do anything. Don't do anything. Newman always wanted talent around him because he felt it made him look better.
All right. I'll jump first. No. Then you jump first.
Oh, I said.
What's the matter with you?
I can't swim.
Why, are you crazy? The fall will probably kill you.
Released in 1969, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid received mixed to negative reviews from many top critics. But the film became an unexpected box office blockbuster, one of the top grossing movies of the year.
Within, I think about 2-3 weeks, it rose past whatever negative criticism there was. It just kind of blew right through it, and that was the end of that.
Audiences around the world embraced the Western fable and its magnetic stars, who embodied the 60s generation's contempt for authority.
Well, that ought to do it.
Think you use enough dynamite there, Butch?
Butch Cassidy was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. That same year, Paul took greater control over his career. Newman joined with fellow superstars Sidney Poitier and Barbra Streisand to form First Artists Pictures, a company designed to produce smaller, more independent films. But the need for personal and creative freedom wasn't new for the 44-year-old. Paul and his wife Joanne were dedicated to a series of liberal causes and political campaigns.
Paul takes his citizenship very seriously. I have the highest respect for him, not only as an actor and as a professional and talented that way, but as a human being, for the kind of person, the kind of citizen, the kind of individual that he is. Outstanding.
Paul had traveled to Alabama in 1963 with James Garner and Marlon Brando to promote civil rights. In 1968, he declared his opposition to the war in Vietnam and campaigned for Eugene McCarthy, speaking at the Democratic National Convention.
As I've said before, if I carry more weight than my credentials would allow, I apologize for that. But you can't consider yourself a disenfranchised citizen merely because you're in the acting profession.
Paul Newman campaigned tirelessly for the Democrats in 1968. He discovered, much to his surprise, that the Jaguar he was renting on weekends was rented during the week by none other than the Republican candidate Richard Nixon, known to those who were not voting for him as Tricky Dick. So Paul Newman left a note for Mr. Nixon saying something along the lines that this clutch is tricky, so you won't have any trouble with it. And then many years later, he was very proud to see that he had turned up on President Nixon's enemies list, but disappointed that he was only at number 19.
At the box office, at least, Paul Newman was now number 1. But after the success of Butch Cassidy, the actor's career hit an unexpected slump. As the 1970s began, a string of financial disappointments did little for Paul's morale. But the actor was still challenging himself in films like the tongue-in-cheek Western The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean, directed by John Huston.
Judge Roy Bean. I am the new law in this area. The ancient Greeks worshipped the feet of Aphrodite. They loved mortal women as well. The same goes for me.
In 1973, Newman was pleased when Universal Pictures proposed a re-teaming of Paul, Robert Redford, and Butch Cassidy director George Roy Hill. The project was a comedy about two irrepressible con men. It was called The Sting.
Chicago was the place to be in 1936. In those days, the big con was a dying art, until a first-class grifter on the lam from the FBI and a young gaffer from Joliet joined forces to con the Big Mick.
He's not as tough as he thinks. Neither are we.
In The Sting, it was evident right at the very beginning that that was first-class material. And if we did our work together, all three of us, that it couldn't miss.
The great Henry Gondor.
Turn it off. Glad to meet you, kid. You're a real horse's ass.
The movie's on-screen cons continued off the set. Newman delighted in playing elaborate practical jokes on his director and his co-star.
Redford left a birthday present for me. It was a Porsche. It had hit a tree sideways at 90 miles an hour. It had been cannibalized. Most of the engine was gone. It was brought and put in my driveway by a tow truck and dropped there. That made him one up. So I had some friends compacted and put in a box. And I got his alarm code from the real estate lady. And four of us carried this box with this compressed Porsche and left it in the vestibule. I called the next day and spoke to his kids. Hi, how's it going? Anything interesting? No. And to this day, he's never admitted that this 750-pound compressed Porsche was sitting in his vestibule. So he got the last word on that, but I'm not dead yet.
Mr. Shaw, this is a gentleman's game. We assume you're all good for your debts. How much would you like, Mr. Shaw?
I'll start with 5,000. Mr. Shaw, we usually require a tie at this table. If you don't have one, we can get you one. Hey, that'd be real nice of you, Mr. Lonergan. Lonergan.
Released in 1973, The Sting was an enormous box office hit. It also was the surprise winner of the Academy Award for Best Picture of the Year and reestablished Paul Newman as an international superstar.
Paul and I are always talking about doing another project. I guess we're both as surprised as anybody else why that hasn't happened, considering Hollywood's penchant for doing sequels. They try to get us to do one of The Sting, Butch Cassidy, and we weren't interested in that. And there's not been a good script that has come our way that we wanted to commit to, but we would like to.
Action!
Newman followed The Sting with an all-star blockbuster whose appeal was literally surefire. Producer Irwin Allen's disaster drama, The Towering Inferno.
Now, the producer of the Poseidon Adventure brings you more spectacle, more stars, more suspense than you've ever seen in one motion picture.
Newman agreed to appear with co-star Steve McQueen at a price of $1 million, plus a percentage of the gross. The competitive McQueen considered Newman his greatest rival, and some in the press predicted battles on the set between the two superstars. But during production, the atmosphere was surprisingly lighthearted.
You've got 15 minutes left. That's all. Self-destruct.
The most fun was Paul Newman. He definitely liked to have a good time. He has a very naughty sense of humor. He loves practical jokes. And I think he knew that this movie was what it was. It wasn't going to be his Oscar-winning best performance ever, so he was having a good time there. And yet, of course, he was always completely professional. Paul has an irascible sense of humor.
How many fuse terminals did you check?
He breaks up worse than I do.
You out of film, Joe? Then cut. Let's pick it up there.
It's irreverent. It's sly in a way, but they're extremely bawdy.
You're looking very pleased with yourself, I must say.
You bet your sweet ass.
Cut. Very nice. Jerry, would you tie Mr. Newman down?
Newman and McQueen were ready for that stuff. They're macho guys. They're gonna, whatever happened to them, they loved it. Can we do this? How about more water?
The Towering Inferno also gave Newman the chance to share the screen with his own son, Scott. Now 24 years old, Scott Newman was struggling to achieve success on his own as a performer. It was one of many ways that he emulated his famous father. But Scott felt increasingly frustrated by his own lack of achievement.
They were both very charming, and they both had this drive to succeed. But it was very difficult for him to have a father who was this living legend, a heroic type of figure. And how is the son going to make his mark when his father is so accomplished in the very thing that the son wants to do?
I want you out of here.
So you can stop worrying about me. What about me down there worrying about you?
The Towering Inferno.
Released in 1974, The Towering Inferno grossed over $100 million in a theatrical run that lasted nearly a year. Hot on the heels of The Sting, the film solidified Paul Newman's status as a Hollywood superstar. But when the spotlight turned too bright on him, Paul needed to retreat into his world of outside interests. The actor was reluctant to give interviews and fought hard to maintain his privacy amid the non-stop scrutiny of press and the public.
I think I get a very unfortunate view of the press. I think of what is written about me, about 5% is accurate. I'm not comfortable, for the most part, with the press, and they're not comfortable with me. I certainly am not comfortable with photographers.
I don't know how people survive that. You see, it's an interesting topic because he has survived it. And I think with that sense of humor, it hasn't gone to his head or destroyed him. And I think partly must be because of his roots and his marriage and his children. He's had a very secure home life, and I think that's part of it.
Paul Newman may appear to be aloof to autograph hounds or people who demand that he take off his sunglasses so they can see his eyes. But I think it's entirely justifiable with his family and friends. He's said to be a wonderful husband and father. He has, though, admitted at times to being somewhat emotionally remote from his children and regretful of that.
Despite Newman's commitment to his wife and family, even he and Joanne couldn't escape Hollywood gossip that there was trouble in their marriage.
Periodically, rumors would surface that they were about to break up. Finally, Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman took out an ad apologizing for not obliging the gossip columnists, but they would try to come up with something for them, but they actually liked each other very much.
But it was true that the superstar had found a new love, auto racing. While filming Winning in 1968, Newman discovered that he could escape the pressures of celebrity on the racing circuit.
You're a winner. What else?
He just wants to win. He doesn't care what the stakes are.
None of the IndyCar teams would rent us a car to teach him. Here's this guy, the actor who's going to become a race driver. Yeah, right. No one really believed it. So we rented a Ford GT40. We started out, he was a little rough. But then gradually, step by step, we started picking it up, learning very quickly.
In fact, Paul raced so well that he insisted on doing his own stunt driving on screen, much to the concern of studio bosses and his wife.
Joanne was not very keen on Paul driving a race car, period. Gradually, she started accepting everything. She finally accepted the fact that, hey, he's driving smooth, he's using his head, and he's really not going to get hurt. And then she got enthusiastic about it.
In 1975, Newman formed his own team, PLN Racing. Over the next few years, PLN proved its talent at showings in dozens of races all over the country.
You're third fastest in this session. I think the track might have slowed up a little bit.
Thank you, Scott.
No problem.
Paul now planned his film shoots around his racing schedule. He even made fun of his passion on screen in the Mel Brooks comedy Silent Movie.
Starring Paul Newman.
But as Newman's real-life racing became more competitive, it also got more dangerous. Paul was involved in several serious crashes. Still, the actor managed to always walk away unhurt. Professionally, Paul was also ready to tackle an adventurous slate of films. The 1977 comedy Slapshot reteamed the star with his Butch Cassidy and Sting director, George Roy Hill. This time, the subject was hockey and the dirty side of professional sports.
Behind the comedy, the sex, the wild excitement. This is the absorbing story of one man fighting to hang on in a world gone absurd.
They don't want you to score goals. They want blood. They're booing you.
But despite many strong reviews, the raunchy Slapshot failed to score at the box office. Newman also joined forces in the late 1970s with another Hollywood maverick, director Robert Altman, whose outrageous satires of American life Paul greatly admired. Their first film together was the comedy Buffalo Bill and the Indians, in which Newman and Altman punctured the legend of the real-life Old West hero.
Someday my hair is going to be as long as Custer's.
It also features brave cowboys, fierce Indians, countless feats of Western skill and daring, and priceless gems of frontier wisdom.
The difference between a white man and an Indian in all situations is in an Indian's red. Buffalo Bill is a symbol as far as I'm concerned. I just took the part of the first movie star. And the reason that I'm enjoying this probably more than any other reason is that it really murders me and Redford and Gable and Tracy and the Queen. Because there's simply no way that a human being can sustain what has become legendary about him over the years.
Although Newman loved making the film, Buffalo Bill and the Indians was harshly received by most reviewers. Undaunted, the star and Robert Altman reteamed for the futuristic drama Quintet. It was another critical and commercial misfire.
Paul would do a character role, and it would be not successful at all, either accepted in Hollywood as the enormous talent that it was. He wasn't doing the thing that they thought he should be doing or that he was known for.
Despite slipping box office, Newman still enjoyed challenging himself as an actor as he moved further away from his image of a movie star. Many believed Paul was born lucky, having achieved so much wealth, fame, and happiness. But in 1978, the 53-year-old was hit with a devastating personal tragedy. For years, Newman's only son, Scott, had struggled to make his own mark in the world. But the would-be actor had yet to find his way, and by the mid-1970s, Scott had turned to drugs.
The same way that Paul Newman felt that he disappointed his father, Arthur, Scott Newman probably felt he disappointed his own father, and it was difficult to measure up.
When Paul learned of his son's addiction, Newman tried to reach out with help, but Scott resisted.
Newman had even hired a medical doctor and a psychologist to be on call for his son. But outside of being with him 24 hours, 7 days a week, there was nothing really he could do.
In November of 1978, Paul was directing a play at his alma mater, Kenyon College, when he received news he had long dreaded. Scott Newman had been found dead in a Los Angeles hotel room, killed by a lethal mix of drugs and alcohol. He was 28 years old. His father later told the press, "I don't think I'll ever escape the guilt." As Paul Newman mourned the death of his only son, his sadness shifted in time into determination as he found a way to turn the greatest loss of his life into a way to help others. In 1980, he and Joanne Woodward founded an organization to help treat other victims of alcohol and drug abuse. They named it the Scott Newman Foundation.
He's done something really unique out of tragedy. I've always admired the effort and the ability that he has put into this charitable organization for Scott Newman. And he's done just a fantastic job. He's worked hard at something that he does not ever have to benefit financially from and never intended to. And that's few and far between in this world today.
I think things change within one's life. You go through good times and bad times, traumas in one's life. And Paul lost a son, and somewhere along the way had to take its toll in sense of changing and being possibly deeper in some resources of yourself.
Professionally, the 1980s would begin for Paul Newman with a commercial disappointment. The Irwin Allen disaster epic, When Time Ran Out, failed to rekindle the box office magic of The Towering Inferno. But for the rest of the decade, Paul skillfully redefined his screen image, bringing a maturity and increased subtlety to his work.
Now, Paul Newman has gone straight to the most commanding role of his career.
In 1981, the actor gave an impressive performance playing an embattled middle-aged cop in Fort Apache, the Bronx.
I've been on this job 18 years. I think every minute of it is on my face.
Paul Newman, Fort Apache, the Bronx.
That same year, Newman played a fresh variation on his loner image, starring with Sally Field in Absence of Malice, playing a libeled businessman who fights back against the press.
There are several reasons why Paul Newman has made such a graceful transition from his earlier persona as heroic leading man to his mature persona as heroic leading man. Part of it has to do with the public's growing recognition through the years that this man is indeed a hero in his personal life, his charitable works and his political and social efforts.
In 1982, the 57-year-old gave what many critics and viewers considered the performance of his lifetime.
His name is Frank Galvin. 4 cases in the last 3 years. He's lost them all. He drinks. This man's scared to death to go to court.
The verdict cast Newman as a washed-up attorney who gets a last chance at redemption when he takes on a medical malpractice case against powerful political forces.
He said, if not now, when? I know what I said, but not now, all right? I'll tell you something else. I can win it. I can win this case.
Ironically, the role of Frank Galvin had earlier been offered to Robert Redford, who wanted to change the nature of the character, but Newman responded to the part exactly as written.
Maybe I can do something right. Well, I could certainly understand his attraction to booze. I went through a long time that I misbehaved.
Long road that has no turning. Newman jumped at the chance to play a character whose frailties he recognized in himself.
What attracted Paul Newman mainly to the role of Frank Galvin in The Verdict was that Frank Galvin was a frightened man, a wounded icon of goodness, you could say.
There are no other cases. This is the case. There are no other cases. This is the case.
Paul Newman has always been afraid of failure, but what makes him wonderful is that he has constantly challenged his own fear of failure, so that if he's afraid of anything, his friends say, you can be sure that he will try to do it.
But while rehearsing before filming, Paul made an unsettling discovery.
I realized that I still had a long way to go, and it wasn't as though I would be ready for opening night as I should have been, that I had just begun to tap the complexity of that guy, the emotional bankruptcy that he was facing. If I take the money, I'm lost. I'll just be a rich ambulance chaser.
By the time cameras rolled, Paul had profoundly connected with the character.
All I want on this trial was a fair shake. Pushing into court 5 days early. I lose my star witness, and I can't get a continuance, and I don't care. I'm going up there, I'm going to try it, I'm going to let the jury decide. If they told me about you, said you're a hard ass, you're a defendant's judge, well, I don't care. I said to hell with it, to hell with it.
The verdict earned Newman his 6th nomination for Best Actor. Many in Hollywood, including the film's co-producer Richard Zanuck, believed that this year the Oscar would be Paul's.
He was shooting a picture in Florida. I begged him to come to the awards, and he said, I don't think I'll get it. He said, I've been nominated 5 times before, I've never gotten it. I said, this is the time you're going to get it. So he did fly out. We had dinner at my house. He went to the awards the next night, and he didn't get it.
The statue eluded Newman for a 6th time when Ben Kingsley won that night for Gandhi. But Paul Newman was at a period in his life where awards no longer seemed important. His focus was now on accomplishments beyond acting. During the 1980s, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward's selfless interest in philanthropic causes grew. One night while dining at Beverly Hills' fashionable Chasen's restaurant, Paul told the management he didn't like their oily salad dressing. From this humble start, almost as a joke, Paul took his Newman's Own dressing on the market to local Connecticut supermarkets, donating the profits to charity. Within a few years, a multi-million-dollar food company was born. Newman's Own was so successful that by 1985, Paul and Joanne presented a check for $250,000 for emergency relief to drought-stricken Africa. Paul, with typical humor, was quoted as saying, "From salad dressing, all blessings flow." In Hollywood, Newman also continued to find rewarding projects. He co-wrote and directed the sensitive family drama, Harry and Son. And he directed Joanne, John Malkovich, and Karen Allen in a film of Tennessee Williams' classic play, The Glass Menagerie. But despite his many accomplishments, one achievement still eluded Paul Newman. He had never won an Academy Award. The oversight became so glaring that in 1986, the Motion Picture Academy decided to honor Paul with a special Oscar for lifetime achievement. But Newman wasn't out of the race yet.
Paul Newman, Tom Cruise. in a Martin Scorsese picture.
That year, the 61-year-old returned to one of his most famous roles from 25 years before. Newman played an older and wiser Fast Eddie Felson in The Color of Money, director Martin Scorsese's sequel to The Hustler.
You're an incredible flake. But that's a gift.
It's always hard for me to be around a person who has, as I said, a mythic presence on the screen when you first moment you see him on that screen, and then to be around that person in a normal situation. I was about to make The Color of Money, and for a few weeks or a couple of months, actually, it took me a little while to feel that I could be a little more comfortable around Paul Newman. And as Paul told me, he said, don't tell me when you were a kid you're watching that. Oh, of course, when I was a child, when I was about 8 or 9 or 10 or 11, 12, there's Paul Newman up on the screen.
I'm not your daddy, I'm not your boyfriend, so don't be playing games with me. I'm your partner.
Co-starring Tom Cruise, the film featured a textured and mature performance from Newman.
It's so hard to explain what it takes to be able to tap the emotion that you carry with you. Sometimes you have to dig for it. At other times, it's at your fingertips, and you don't even have to call on it.
We got a racehorse here, thoroughbred. You make him feel good, I teach him how to run.
$500 says you choke right now. You used me!
Yes, I did. You smell what I smell? Smoke?
Money. Paul Newman had always felt that Fast Eddie Felson, Hustler, was not finished, that he had not learned his lesson. And The Color of Money, in a sense, finishes that character's development. And the role that Tom Cruise played was very much parallel to the young Fast Eddie Felson, with Paul Newman playing Eddie now as mentor towards a young, cocky man who's very gifted but will not listen.
The Color of Money also sparked an off-screen friendship between the veteran actor and his screen protege.
There are a lot of parallels between the youthful Paul Newman and Tom Cruise, wanting to resist being cast solely on the basis of looks, wanting to prove themselves as actors, enjoying masculine, challenging sports, and the two developed a wonderful relationship.
Paul asked me if I'd teach Tom Cruise. He was looking at doing another movie, doing a movie on racing. He wasn't as keen, though, as Paul. Paul decided, I want to drive a race car, and that's it. That's what I'm going to do. Tom drove a race car because they were going to make a movie, and I think that there lies the difference.
The Color of Money was one of the biggest hits of the year. Paul earned his 7th Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. To avoid the public embarrassment of yet another defeat, Newman stayed home instead of attending the ceremony. But on March 30th, 1987, Paul Newman was finally awarded the Oscar for the year's best performance by an actor. Later, summing up his feelings, Newman said, "It's like chasing a beautiful woman for 80 years. Finally, she relents, and you say, 'I'm terribly sorry, I'm tired.'"
Paul asked me if I would accept for it, and told me roughly what he felt about it. Betty Davis was the presenter, so she was the one to give me the Oscar. I was going to say roughly what Paul had asked me to say. So I go out to get this, and just about to start to thank him, and she said, "Well, we want to talk about you. We want to talk about your films. We want to talk about these films." Named all my films, not all of a lot of it. They wouldn't let me get in there at all with my words of thanks and appreciation to the audience there at the Academy. Never did. By the time I got her calmed down and got her shut up in a sense, we were off the air. So I had to call Paul the next day and tell him that I was sorry that I hadn't had a chance to express his appreciation.
After his Oscar win for The Color of Money, Paul Newman continued to devote his time and energy to auto racing, directing, and the expansion of his charitable causes. His Newman's Own food company now offered other products. Among the most popular was a snack that Paul had loved to eat since childhood, popcorn. By the end of the 1980s, Newman's Own was among the best-known popcorn brands in the nation, and it helped the actor earn the title of one of modern America's leading philanthropists.
Makes millions of dollars come in for those products that he has to go on the market. Doesn't keep a cent of himself. It all goes to charity for those camps for kids that are suffering from cancer here and abroad. He's the most generous man, just philanthropic.
One of the organizations created by Newman's own revenues was the Hole in the Wall Camp, formed for seriously and terminally ill children. The camp offered facilities for over 1,000 children from age 7 to 15. It also included a 300-acre reproduction of a western town, complete with log cabins, a theater, a boathouse, and a frontier hospital with state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment.
Is this as big a thrill as making movies?
More by a factor of about 50. I guess the biggest reward that I've ever had has been to take what I've got and be able to spread it around a little bit.
In 1992, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward were presented with one of the highest awards an American performer can receive, the Kennedy Center Honors.
Thank you very much. This is a special night for all of us. Certainly for Paul and Joanne and the other recipients, but for me as well. I'm here tonight to share my affection and my respect. One of their pet projects is a summer camp for children with life-threatening illnesses that they built in Connecticut in 1986. And tonight, the children have come here to Washington to honor them. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present the Hole in the Wall Gang.
I'm here, we're here, to pay tribute to our two good friends, Paul and Joanne.
The following year, the Newmans celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. Paul was the first to admit that it hadn't always been easy, but he and Joanne weren't quitters.
I think it'd be a very difficult profession to be in, and to be that big a star and not have some anchors in your life. Someone who loves you for who you are and not the ratings of the movies or whatever. And I think that's important. And he's had that. He's had a very secure home life.
As an actor, Newman had continued to choose roles that challenged and invigorated him. He especially loved working with Joanne in films like the Merchant Ivory drama Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, in which he played a patrician figure not unlike his own father. But the actor could also let loose, playing an oversexed Louisiana politician in love with a tantalizing stripper in the comedy drama Blaze. He even poked fun at his own image with a vocal cameo on the hit TV series The Simpsons.
Homer, I'll tell you what I told Redford. It ain't gonna happen.
In 1995, Newman received his 8th Best Actor nomination for the touching comedy drama Nobody's Fool, co-starring Bruce Willis and Melanie Griffith. Paul responded strongly to the part of an aging father who struggles to connect with his son after years of conflict.
Nobody's Fool, there was a certain dimension that surprised me, and maybe it just comes from getting older, but there was a kind of relaxation that I could have watched and watched. I was sorry when that movie was over.
Look how many stars of his ilk stop at his age. And he's talked about stopping. I've seen it in print, whether he's actually said it, but he is now a full-blown character actor. But he still has that magnitude to attract a female audience.
It's great to think that you could stay in the business as long as he's been in and not be bitter or cranky, or he just enjoys everything, and everything's a surprise for him, whether it's a new piece. I remember him once saying, come here, I want you to listen to this, and bringing me in to listen to some string quartet or some tape that he had, taste this tomato, he'd bring me in, I just got these tomatoes, and taste this tomato. I mean, just so enthusiastic about life. I mean, obviously that's why he looks so great.
He's as good looking today in a different way as he ever was as a kid. Even in his aging today, tremendous amount of the youth that was there. And I think it's wonderful.
In 2000, the actor returned to the stage, joining his wife Joanne in Ancestral Voices, a gentle comic story of a young man dealing with the divorce of his grandparents. 2 years later, the 77-year-old accepted a different and much darker role on the big screen. In director Sam Mendes' drama Road to Perdition, co-starring Tom Hanks, Newman brought a chilling pain and depth to the part of a ruthless Irish gangster.
You think I'd give up my son? He was betraying you. I know. Now listen to me. I tried to avoid more bloodshed. You wouldn't accept that, so I did what was necessary. But I've always loved you like a son, and now I'm telling you, leave before it's too late.
All you got to do is do it, and that's how you fill those moments so that they aren't just static moments. I don't know that you can always capture all of it, but you can certainly bring the audience in with you so that they can read the indecision, or they can read the conviction, or they can read the probing, whatever it is that you're trying to convey.
Road to Perdition gave Paul his 9th Oscar nomination, and the star still showed no signs of slowing down.
Paul loves his work. No, I don't think he'll ever retire. He loves to act.
Newman next made a triumphant return to Broadway, starring in an acclaimed production of Our Town. 2003 also marked the 21st year of the company Newman's Own, with over $125 million donated to charity.
The spaghetti sauce is outgrossing my film, and it's a public humiliation that I don't have to go into detail about.
Paul signed an exclusive deal with the fast food chain McDonald's to supply his dressings for their premium salads. The agreement created even greater earnings for his charitable causes.
I think he's just one of the very fine citizens of this country. And he's terribly devoted to anything that he does.
Hey, wait a minute. You didn't see the fours out there, did you? The fours? No. Oh, good. For a moment there, I thought we were in trouble.
With his enduring talent and charm, Paul Newman has evolved from a child of privilege in Shaker Heights to become one of the finest screen actors of his generation. Along the way, he has also helped countless people to realize their own dreams of a better life.
Paul is a class act, sweet class act with a sense of humor.
You're looking very pleased with yourself, I must say.
That's your sweet ass.
Of course, maybe I'm a pushover, Paul Newman.
He has a wonderful sense of humor, but what was underneath all that was his absolute discipline.
Boy, I got vision, and the rest of the world wears bifocals.
Paul Newman, over the years, has really come to embody a wonderful notion of what we want a man to be. He has that primitive masculine energy, but he has transmuted it into something very noble and very wonderful.
He's a totally unpretentious person. He's not seemingly in it for himself, and he is very generous. It's fun to work with him. He's a real human being.
She gets too hungry for dinner at
Frank Sinatra owned the most recognizable voice of the 20th century. He won Grammys, Oscars, hobnobbed with gangsters, and romanced the most beautiful women of his time. But behind the music, the sex, and the fame was a man with unbridled ambition and a thirst for power and control.
Frank didn't take any crap from anybody. And that was his motto.
In the next 2 hours, we'll focus on Frank's climb to power in the heyday of Hollywood, where he excelled on the soundstage and in the bedroom.
Well, he dated the world, for God's sake. You know, everybody wanted to be in his company.
He charmed and discarded Hollywood movie queens until he fell hard for tempestuous beauty Ava Gardner.
These were two of the most dysfunctional people probably of their time in show business. And they found each other.
But he also found ring-a-ding-ding with a group of pals called the Rat Pack.
It was anything you can think of that is fun. These guys were doing.
And he built an amazing relationship with both the White House and the mob.
He had people that could do anything to satisfy him. They would probably even kill.
Through it all, the party never seemed to stop, and neither did the women.
He was crazy about her. She wrapped those long legs around